Chapter 465. The meeting in the teleportation room was rather awkward. Lin Yao seemed to be overly sensitive, showing hostility towards Bliss, who was shrouded in a black robe. If not for Grimm and Gargamel being present, she might have lost control of her impulsive nature and attacked Bliss. Even with Grimm's endorsement, Lin Yao's attitude towards Bliss was still terrible, as if she did not want to get close to him. Bliss, who was hiding under the thick black robe, smiled coldly at Lin Yao's reaction. The eerie green eyes under the shadow of the drooping hood made one shudder. In comparison, while Meryl and Gargamel had also sensed the potential danger Bliss posed, their instincts were not as strong as Lin Yao's. After all, Bliss's strength as a mid-level apprentice was too confusing. Yes, in just half a month, Bliss had advanced a small level, from a beginner apprentice to a mid-level apprentice. It was only because his presence was too weak that Gargamel and Meryl rarely paid attention to him, so they didn't notice the change in his rank at the first moment. Ever since he had fused with the mutated insect queen, Bliss's actions had become more and more discreet, almost never appearing in public. Even today, he was wearing an eye-catching black robe, hiding in the furthest corner from the crowd, silently peeping at everyone through the shadow of his hood. Go to the 4th floor and find yourself a suitable room. I have something to tell you tonight. Grimm saw the awkwardness in the atmosphere, so he turned to Ellis and said. Bliss bowed under the black robe and responded with a muffled and hoarse voice, then left first. Meryl and Gargamel looked at each other, their eyes filled with confusion. The 4th level of the Wizard's Pagoda was where the wizards stationed in the pagoda lived and rested. Even a more powerful prospective wizards could only live on the 3rd level, and were not allowed to step foot into the 4th level without permission. But now, Grimm had given this authority that belonged to the wizards to a mid-level apprentice. Let's go to my place. Grimm nodded at the three. The situation outside has changed greatly. We need to rearrange many things. Gargamel and Meryl nodded silently. Even though Lin Yao was completely uninterested in these trivial matters, he did not dare go against the wishes of the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda, so he could only follow along. Half an hour later, through Grimm's narration, Gargamel finally understood everything that happened in Gilness City during this period of time. But when he heard that Grimm was also shackled by his family because of the magic puppet, Gargamel's thin face showed a look of sympathy. After all, he had become a wandering magus because he could not bear the oppression of his family. Especially when he heard that Grimm promised to hand over 2 elemental magic puppets with the power of an elite wizard to the family every year, his furrowed brows never relaxed. As a pharmacist, he had personal experience in refining witchcraft items of the wizard level. As for those apprentice-level magic medicines, those who were slightly more skilled could basically make a batch in 3 to 4 days. As for those wizard-level magic medicines, due to the huge amount of materials needed, and every single one of them had to go through a series of complicated processes such as filtering, processing, purification, quenching, and so on, it could easily take 10 days to half a month to complete. And the failure rate was relatively high. As for higher quality magic medicines, with Gargamel's abilities, he was still unable to make them. Currently, his spiritual power was only 7 points. With such a weak spiritual power, he wouldn't be able to handle those high-quality magic medicines, which would take a long time and required precise control of his spiritual power during the whole process. It was precisely because he understood this that he could understand the difficulty of refining 2 elite magic puppets in a year. The entire refining process of these elite magic puppets would probably take at least 2 to 3 months, and if the refinement failed, the time would be doubled. This way, even if everything went smoothly for Grimm, he would still need 4 to 6 months to complete the task assigned by his family. That way, he would have half a year to improve his strength. But if he failed to refine one of the magic puppets, he would only have 3 months left. If he failed twice, he would have to wait in the alchemy lab for a year. Day after day, year after year, staying in the cold and quiet alchemy lab, doing tedious repetitive work over and over again. This kind of life was enough to extinguish the passion of most arcane wizards. This made them the slowest group of people in the Magus community. Gargamel hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still spoke his mind. He could not understand how someone as astute as Grimm could not see through the methods used by the Cerubo family, and had even agreed to such harsh conditions. Could it be that he was dazzled by the reward of the rank 2 elemental crystal core? Hearing Gargamel's words, Meryl also looked at Grimm worriedly. This time, she had resolutely come to the blazing flame monarch, drawing a clear line between herself and the group of people in her family. If Grimm's strength was suppressed to the point where it was hard for him to improve, then the fate of this group of followers would not be any better. Hence, she was especially concerned about Grimm's reply. "Don't worry." Grimm understood what the two were thinking. "I know what's going on, and I have a way to deal with it." Also, at this point, Grimm paused for a moment. "I've already figured out the way to advance to rank 2, but I need a long period of time to settle and accumulate. Hence, this matter will only benefit me and not harm me. Advance to rank 2. Hearing Grimm's reply, Gargamel and Meryl both revealed shocked expressions. Although Grimm was their master, teacher, he possessed strength that they trusted. But he had only been a magus for 11 years. Now, he was actually thinking about advancing to rank 2. How could this not make them feel as if the world was spinning and the world had gone dark? This was especially true for Gargamel, who had been a magus for more than 70 years. He felt his beliefs crumbling. Was there really such a huge difference between people? Had he been living like a dog all these years? It's not as exaggerated as you think. I just know where I'm heading. Grimm did not expect his casual words to cause his two subordinates to show such exaggerated expressions. He could not help but explain, although the direction is clear, the road ahead is still long. I reckon that I won't be able to break through to rank 2 without at least 80 or 90 years. So that was how it was. But thinking about it, Gargamel still felt like he had been abandoned by fate. He did not expect Grimm to be able to find his direction so quickly. All right, since you're done asking, it's my turn. Lin Yao had been waiting impatiently. Master, what's up with that black-robed fellow? Why do I have the urge to destroy him the moment I see him? Lin Yao's question immediately pulled Gargamel and Meryl out of their thoughts, and they turned to look at Grimm. His name is Bliss, and he was once a beginner apprentice. It was you, Gargamel, who personally brought him into the wizard's pagoda. Grimm spoke slowly. Bliss. Gargamel stroked his goatee as he muttered to himself. To be honest, he felt that the name was somewhat familiar, but he could not match the person he saw today with a certain image in his memory. Could it be the first apprentice who wanted to join the wizard's pagoda? But his aura? Gargamel had already remembered, but he could not be sure. With the mental energy of a wizard, things like photographic memory and memory recall were child's play. But when a wizard recognized a person, they relied more on the aura of their soul than their physical appearance. When a person's life and soul were mixed together, they could form a completely different aura. This aura could be strengthened or weakened, and it could also change according to the changes in the source of the soul. But to completely change the aura of one's soul in such a short period of time was almost impossible. At the very least, a wizard apprentice should not have such a strange technique. Some time ago, Mary returned from another dimension. She killed the evil worm in Titch, and after wiping away his soul imprint, she gave me the mutated worm queen that had fused with him. So I let Bliss fuse with it. It was just a few short sentences, but there was a soul-stirring story hidden within. The plot was full of twists and turns, and even a book would not be able to describe all of it. Meryl knew a thing or two about the conflict between Grimm, Mary, and Intitch. Seeing the confused expressions on Gargamel and Lin Yao's faces, she could only tell them what she knew in a low voice. Then Lady Mary is our mistress? This was the first time Gargamel had heard this, and he actually blurted out what was on his mind. Grimm's expression froze. Meryl was already laughing softly at the side. That might not be the case. Teacher still has Sister Alice, and she's not a pushover either. Now that Lady Mary is looking for her, who knows if they'll have a fierce fight? Why is there an Alice? Gargamel was obviously someone who loved to pry into other people's privacy. His eyes lit up as he asked, "Who is this Alice? Why have I never heard Master mention her? Tell me, tell me." Grim quickly interrupted his subordinates, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he asked, "Gargamel, you still haven't reported to me about the situation around the Flame Monarch. Are the leaders of the magical creatures still quiet? Have they come to the Wizard's Pagoda to cause trouble?" Hearing Grim's question, Gargamel remembered something. Chapter 466. The Black Forest was never peaceful at night. In the deep and stealthy darkness, there were unpredictable dangers lurking everywhere. Ferocious beasts went out to hunt at night. Blood-sucking magic vines camouflage among the vines. Acid-rot swamps that looked like grassland but were actually hideous haunts, as well as ferocious predators that wandered the depths of the forest like phantoms. Adding on the legendary defilers, monsters, and magical creatures, all these things formed a true wild world full of species and rich resources. The Black Forest. 60 kilometers north of the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda was the territory of the Beemen. It was late at night, but here it was still a tense and busy scene. Teams of Beeman warriors wielding poisoned spears and bows flapped their wings as they darted in and out of the forest, many of them carrying their prey. Most of them were normal forest creatures like horned goats, hyenas, and apes. Berserk apes, carrion beasts, and human mercenaries could also be seen every now and then. Under normal circumstances, every team of Beemen was made up of 15 Beeman warriors. Following a certain pattern, they walked through the Black Forest 30 miles around their nest, carefully searching for prey that could be hunted. Every time they encountered a wild beast or magical creature that came out to hunt, it meant that a battle was inevitable. It was precisely because of their terrifying, offensive capabilities that none of the Beeman teams that returned to their nests were full. The worst team only had 4 Beeman warriors that returned, but without exception, they all brought back some spoils of war. The Beeman's nest was built in a dense forest. It was a strange building that looked like a beehive. It was also the Beeman Queen's delivery room, a special space for her to give birth and nurture her tribe. Ordinary Beemen were not qualified to enter the beehive. Only a few specially selected Beeman servants were allowed to surround the queen, serving her food and taking care of the eggs that had just hatched. The incubation period of the Beemen was very short. It only took 7 days for a wasp egg to hatch into a Beeman warrior. As long as there was enough food, a beehive could produce Beeman warriors at an explosive rate. According to the wizard's strength classification, a normal Beeman warrior strength was only 0.7. However, even though their individual strength was very weak, as long as a certain number of them gathered together, the danger they posed would skyrocket. It had wings that allowed it to fly, and it also had exquisite poison-making skills. It could use its bow and arrow to launch long-range attacks, and it could also carry its 3-pronged spear to launch diving attacks in close combat. With all these advantages piled together, coupled with their endless numbers, once the Beemen gained a foothold, they would quickly become the overlords of the nearby forests. In this vast, dark forest, apart from powerful monsters like the giant barbarian elephants and the twin-legged flying dragons that they did not dare to provoke, almost all other creatures and monsters were on the Beeman's prey list. Hence, during the time Grim was away from the blazing Flame Monarch, the number of Beemen without any natural enemies to control them grew at an explosive rate. Their disorderly growth undoubtedly posed a great threat to the external organizations that had just been established around the blazing Flame Monarch. In the short span of 7 to 8 days, the Gargamel had already received news of the deaths of 2 foreign apprentices and a dozen troops. In a short period of time, the blazing Flame Monarch had classified a 30 to 40-mile area around the Beeman's nest as an extremely dangerous zone. The Wizard's Pagoda had even banned anyone from entering this area. However, the appearance of an overly powerful group of magical creatures around the blazing Flame Monarch was not a good thing, no matter how one looked at it. Hence, on the one hand, troops and low-level apprentices were forbidden from approaching the hunting zone of the Beemen. On the other hand, the Wizard's Pagoda had also issued an internal extermination mission, calling for high-level apprentices to systematically clean up these disorderly magical creatures. A battle had just ended near a small, desolate mountain stream. A scarlet flame tiger that was 3 meters long and weighed 300 kilograms had become the prey of a hunting team of beemen. The dead scarlet flame tiger lay motionless on the grass in the forest, its bright yellow body covered in red magical markings pierced with short black arrows. There were even 2 broken spears protruding from its neck. The weak strength of the beemen warriors was not enough to kill the berserk scarlet flame tiger, but the poison on their weapons could. Hence, this unlucky lone scarlet flame tiger had been poisoned to death. However, the berserk fireballs that the scarlet flame tiger spat also caused great damage to the hunting team of beemen. 4 beemen warriors could not dodge in time and were blasted into pieces, while 3 more died from the terrifying bite and flaming tail of the scarlet flame tiger when they were diving down to attack. The remaining 8 beemen warriors also suffered some damage from the flames, but this did not stop them from happily cutting up the scarlet flame tiger's body and transporting the meat back in batches. The flesh of magical creatures that were rich in elemental energy was a great tonic and one of the favorite foods of the Beeman Queen. However, just as they were busy surrounding the carcass of the scarlet flame tiger, a sound came from a forest not far away. A humanoid creature, hidden in a thick black robe, appeared in the vision of the Beeman warriors. A human. Not only was it a human, it was also the Queen's favorite human spellcaster, because in this forest, only the so-called sorcerer apprentices dared to run around in black robes. The Beeman warriors were overjoyed. Buzz, 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 the sound of bee-like wings flapping could be heard. The 8 Beeman warriors threw away the bloody items in their hands, grabbed their spears, and instantly flew into the air. In order to avoid possible spells from the human acolyte, the few Beeman warriors spread out and quickly approached the black-robed figure under the cover of the dense branches and vines. What surprised them was that the black-robed figure did not try to escape. Instead, it raised its head slightly, and a pair of strange green eyes shot out from the shadow of the hood, coldly glancing at the Beemen. Although the situation was a little strange, the Beemen warriors still followed the fixed procedure and attacked the enemy. The first wave of attack was naturally the semi-long-range poisoned arrows. Swoosh, 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 8 poison arrows passed through the gaps in the forest and shot at the black-robed figure like locusts. The opponent did not have any intention of dodging, nor did he cast any defensive spells. He just stood there and let the poisoned arrows hit his body. From the dull sound of the poisoned arrows entering the body, it could be determined that the opponent was not wearing any metal armor under the black robe. Hence, the 8 Beeman warriors became even more excited and continuously shot arrows as they closed in. When they were less than 10 steps away from the black-robed figure, they threw away the longbows in their hands and swooped down with their 3-pronged spears. When the 8 spears pierced into the opponent's body with a piercing sound, the black-robed figure suddenly let out a strange, sharp insect hiss. His entire body suddenly exploded into a sky full of black beetles, instantly drowning the 8 Beeman warriors in the terrifying swarm of beetles. It was the first time the Beeman warriors had encountered such a terrifying counterattack. They screamed in fear and tried to pull themselves up, but their heads, faces, bodies, legs, and even their translucent wings were covered in a layer of strange black beetles. What made them even more terrified was the strange rustling sound that sounded like silkworms gnawing on mulberry leaves, and the terrifying pain they felt in their limbs. A few of the stronger Beeman warriors barely managed to flap their wings and fly up, but because they could not see, they crashed into the branches and fell down. The Beeman warriors struggled frantically and retaliated. Many of the black beetles that were only the size of soybeans were crushed into a bloody paste, and the poison turned them into black goo. However, the remaining numbers were enough to kill these 8 unlucky fellows who did not have any other spells. Soon, the forest regained its peace. Only the strange rustling sound that made one's hair stand could be heard in the quiet and serene dark forest. After a while, the black beetles that had eaten their fill once again gathered together, once again taking the form of Bliss. The acolyte who had won the first battle stood quietly in the blood-stained ground, silently enjoying the sweet blood energy coursing through his body. Although the Abbé Bee-men were a type of magical creature, they had the characteristics of bees and elves and were considered a type of humanoid magical creature. If it was in the past, with Bliss's personality, he would never have done such a cruel thing like eating his opponent raw. But today, after fusing with the mutant insect queen, everything before his eyes seemed so natural, and he was no longer surprised. This is the world of my dreams. Ever since the fusion was successful, Bliss's violent and bloodthirsty nature had been greatly suppressed by Grimm. Although he had secretly hunted for a lot of blood food, those weak humans did not give him much energy to evolve. In comparison, magical creatures with elemental energy were the most suitable food. Of course, those sweet and tasty human acolytes were also walking delicacies. But Grimm's master had given him strict orders that he could not eat wizards and acolytes without permission. Thus, Bliss could only suppress his urge to hunt in the wizard's pagoda, and under his master's orders, he came here to cause trouble for the Abbé Bee-men. After finishing his meal, Bliss continued to move forward with heavy steps into the depths of the forest. Behind him, the dense swarm of beetles wrapped in scattered pieces of flesh followed him closely like loyal hunting dogs. Bliss had only barely completed the evolution of his insect body and obtained the immortal insect body, but he had yet to breed a single mutant beetle to fight for him. In this state, he was undoubtedly extremely weak. If he encountered the powerful magical creature leaders, he could only turn around and run for his life. Chapter 467. In one night, 2 Bee-men teams that went out to hunt had disappeared. This immediately made the beehive restless and restless. After the sky brightened, the beehive that had just quietened down became noisy again. Teams of fully armed Bee-men warriors rushed out of the beehive and began to carefully search the area where the missing teams were patrolling. The battlefield was quickly discovered, but there were surprisingly few traces of battle. Apart from some traces of fire and some broken arrows and spears, there were no remains of any corpses, not even a piece of flesh. This was rarely seen in battles against magical beasts. Judging from the situation, the Bee-men hunting team had encountered the scarlet flame tigers. However, what the commander of the Bee-men could not understand was that if the number of scarlet flame tigers was too large for them to handle, the Bee-men hunting team could just fly high and hide in the treetops to escape unscathed. There was no need for a direct confrontation with the tigers. Since the Bee-men hunting team and the scarlet flame tigers fought, it meant that the leader of the team believed that they could defeat the Bee-men. So where were they now? It could be seen that the scene of the battle had been carefully cleaned up. It was so clean that not even a piece of flesh could be found. If not for the strange smell of the scarlet flame tigers, the commander of the Bee-men would have suspected that human magus had intruded into their territory. However, the style of the battle did not seem to be that of a human magus. Those greedy human sorcerers were not cruel and bloodthirsty monsters. After they killed their prey, they would only take the organs or parts of the prey that had the richest life essence. They would not be like the most cruel monsters who would not let go of even a little bit of flesh. Just as the commander of the Bee-men was flapping its wings and flying around the scene, hoping to find some clues, a Bee-man warrior rushed to its side while panting. There's a demon's nest. This Bee-man warrior that had run back from afar to deliver a message was obviously greatly frightened. Even his words were stuttering. This made the commander of the Bee-men's heart tighten. A moment later, the commander of the Bee-men brought a large group of Bee-men warriors to the demon's nest. This used to be the nest of a terrifying gray bear, but with the arrival of the Abbé Bee-men, this cave of about 20 square meters lost its owner forever. However, it was obvious that this place had been occupied by some terrifying demon last night. This place was like an abandoned insect nest. The ground and walls were covered with a layer of strange fungal carpet. In the middle of the cave, there were 5 or 6 mounds of earth that looked like ant mounds. However, they had already been pushed down and destroyed, and the terrifying appearance of the towering mounds could no longer be seen. As soon as it stepped into the cave, the Beeman commander was disgusted by the pungent smell of blood. However, when its gaze landed on the collapsed mounds, the beekeeper commander could no longer suppress its anger. These damned bastards! These damned anthill nests were actually built with the flesh and blood of the Beeman warriors, with chips and wet soil. Amidst the collapsed nest, the Beeman commander saw half a wing and the stinger of the Beeman. Judging from a situation at the scene, this was simply a farm where the damned alien insects were devouring the flesh and blood of the Beeman warriors. However, they were a step too late. Those damned alien insects had already hatched and moved away. Send out all the patrols and search every part of the forest. We must find those damned bastards. The Beeman commander's shrill roar immediately rang out in the cave. As the order was given, teams of Beeman warriors swarmed out, turning the entire dark forest into a chaotic quagmire in the blink of an eye. Everything that happened in the faraway forest clearly did not affect the normal life in the Flame Monarch's wizard pagoda. Grim had just finished tempering his mental energy and returned from the underground lava sea when he received a message from Blitz. He had successfully set up his roots in the Abbé Beeman's territory and had successfully hatched 5 thorn scorpion larvae. Yes, after Blitz fused with the mutated insect queen, due to the difference in their attributes and talent, what hatched was not a carrion beetle, but a thorn scorpion with dual attributes of dark and earth. According to the message sent by Blitz, Grim had a basic understanding of the thorn scorpion larvae's basic abilities. Unfortunately, the thorn scorpion larvae had lost the ability to fly, but had compensated with the ability to drill into the ground and launch earth and dark element attacks. Their basic attack method was to drill into the ground beneath the enemy's feet, then suddenly charge out to launch a terrifying close-range attack. Their main weapons of attack were the giant chelicerae and sinister mouthparts that grew at the front of their bodies, as well as the venomous stingers on their backs. When they attacked, they could cast a weak quagmire spell, causing the enemies around them to sink into a thick, mud-like earth element smoke. Their main attacks also carried the terrifying shadow damage. Of course, if these larvae could successfully mature, they could lurk underground and launch earth spear strikes or shadow ambush. As long as the enemy could not force them out of the ground, they would be almost invincible. If the mature thorn scorpion could evolve into an elite-level magical creature, they could awaken even more terrifying wizard abilities. However, in the absence of actual data and information, Grim was unable to predict the abilities they might obtain in advance. The hard carapace of scorpion-like creatures could protect them from most physical damage, while the quagmire spell and shadow attack could confine large groups of enemies around them. From this aspect, Bliss's thorn scorpion army could grow into a meat shield unit that was good at fighting in chaotic battles. This would greatly relieve the pressure on the elemental demon manticores, allowing them to shine as long-range attackers. After experiencing a planar war, Grim had vaguely formed his own set of battle experiences. The so-called planar war was just a beautified version of the invasion of a plane. This way, the invaders would not only have to face the suppression of the will of the plane, but they would also have to defend against the flood of natives. In this situation, if the invaders wanted to fight a positional battle, they would be looking for death. Therefore, while maintaining high mobility and concealment, the key to defeating the enemy was to quickly form an army. Be it Grim's elemental demon manticores, Mary's vampire army, or Bliss's thorn scorpion army, they were all indispensable parts of this strategy. Of course, the difficulty of invading a mature plane with such strength was simply astounding. This was why, after careful consideration, Grim decided to take action after he became a Grade 2 Magus. By then, their servant army's tactics would have matured. It would not be like now, where everything was just a framework and prototype, and they did not even have a general or commander who could take charge of an area. After a brief understanding of the Blitz situation, Grimm once again focused his attention on himself. This was the second time he had tempered his spiritual force. The last time it caused his spiritual force to drop from 7 to 6. After a period of rest and adjustment, and using many methods to quickly recover his spiritual force, Grimm was finally able to return to the upper limit of 7. However, after this round of tempering, his mental power plummeted to 5. 8 points again, causing his mental space to shake violently and continuously. This trembling on the spiritual plane was both good and bad for him. The good was that it could shake the solidified spiritual space and detonate the hidden dangers that were detrimental to the expansion of the spiritual space, giving Grimm more room to develop in the future. The bad was that Grimm's entire body was affected by the trembling. Before he could get rid of the trembling, Grimm could not cast any spells. He even had to be careful when using his spiritual force to avoid interfering with the self-adjustment of his spiritual space. Of course, the spells stored in the secret scroll of voodoo were an exception. According to Grimm's estimates, even if he had enough potions and resources, it would take him 5 to 7 days to get rid of the trembling. Considering the endurance of his body and the need to nourish his spiritual force, Grimm felt that it would be best to set the interval between tempering his spiritual force at 10 to 15 days. During this period, he almost lost the ability to cast spells as a magus. He could only rely on the wizard's pagoda and the tight defensive spell formation to protect himself. If this weakness was grasped by his enemy, then Grimm's life would really be in danger. 2 days later, Wizard Kogan arrived at the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda with a large amount of materials. Along with him were the Goblin Cabbie and many of Grimm's apprentices. The place was bustling with activity, and there were more than 20 of them. These were the materials the Solubo family had assigned to Grimm over the past 10 years, and they were all packed up and sent over. It could be seen that after the new contract was signed, the higher-ups of the Solubo family's attitude towards Grimm had changed. They had gone from trying to suppress him to trying their best to support him. It seemed that Lord Sanazar was very confident in successfully dispelling Grimm's ambitions, to the point that he did not mind giving Grimm some benefits in advance. Of course, Grimm knew this in his heart. Under Merrill and Gargamel's control, the Blazing Flame Monarch held a grand banquet to welcome Wizard Kogan's arrival. They also used this banquet to let the apprentices who had joined the Wizard's Pagoda before and the new apprentices get to know each other. After all, the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda would be their place to live, learn, and train for a long time. As such, the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda now had 3 wizards: Grimm, Merrill, and Gargamel. Lin Yao and Mary were not included yet. 5 prospective wizard apprentices, 11 high-level wizard apprentices, 34 mid-level wizard apprentices, and several beginner wizard apprentices. Chapter 468. Wizard Kogan's arrival was a pleasant surprise for Grimm. The Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda had been guarding the Black Forest for a long time, and had already gathered a large number of magical creature materials, including many wizard-level magical creatures. If they wanted to extract the most value from them, killing them and extracting their magic organs was undoubtedly the best way to do so. If they could tame them, it would undoubtedly be the best. However, the Blazing Flame Monarch had not been able to find a beast tamer with enough strength, so they could only give up on the idea. After much consideration, they decided that turning them into loyal and obedient wizard beasts was more beneficial to the Wizard's Pagoda. When Wizard Kogan arrived, Grimm took the opportunity to ask him to stay and help the Blazing Flame Monarch digest the magical creature resources that they had recently accumulated. The corpse of an elite giant berserk baboon, a twin-legged flying dragon, a red flame tiger, 7 razor boars, and 23 berserk baboons. From this, one could see the importance of leader-level monsters to the tribe. With the death of the leader, the giant berserk baboon, the other berserk baboons lost their only protection and became easy targets for the surrounding magical creatures and the apprentices of the Wizard's Pagoda. It could be said that almost half of the berserk baboon tribe had fallen into Grimm's hands. As for the rest, they either escaped far away or became food for other magical creatures. In the Black Forest, there was no such thing as firm friendship and love. When the giant berserk baboon was alive, even the twin-legged flying dragon king had to be polite to it. However, once the giant berserk baboon fell, the first to attack its tribe were the powerful twin-legged flying dragons. Wizard Kogan was also surprised that Grimm could bring out so many living magical creatures in one go. Other than delivering the first batch of level 2 elemental crystal cores, he also wanted to help his family repair their relationship with Grimm. Therefore, Kogan agreed to Grimm's small request without hesitation. However, Wizard Kogan hoped that Grimm would pay for the cost of creating the wizard beasts with elemental magic puppets. Grimm, of course, agreed to this. Back in the Plain of Nights, Grimm had come into contact with some wizard beasts. In short, the so-called witchcraft beasts were wild beasts that had been transformed by witchcraft. Wizards used special methods to erase the memory and part of the intelligence of the beast, and then implanted some kind of control runes to make it obedient to them. Once in a battle, a wizard only needed to give an order to stimulate the viciousness of the wizard beasts, allowing them to attack the enemy without fear of death. Beginner wizard beast remodelers could only make some normal beasts, but as an intermediate wizard beast remodeler, Wizard Kogan could already make those wizard rank magical beasts. That was why Grimm had not been able to turn these magical beasts into the battle power of the wizard's pagoda, even though he had possessed them for a long time. One of the main reasons was that the process of wiping the memories of the magical beasts and implanting the control runes was too complicated. If he was not careful, the abilities of the wizard beasts would drop. In fact, if the wizard beast modification master's technique was not up to standard, the modified wizard beast would lose most of its battle instincts and directly become a fool that only knew how to charge around recklessly. An excellent wizard beast remodeler could preserve the original battle skills and methods of the magical beasts to the greatest extent. They could even restore their intelligence. Wizard Kogan used a spell to examine the giant berserk baboon's body. It was already a powerful elite-level magical beast, so there was a chance that it could be transformed into a wizard-rank wizard beast. As for the rest of the magical beasts, due to the quality of their bodies, they could only be transformed into quasi-wizard rank wizard beasts. As for the razor boars, their quality was even lower. After the transformation, they would only have the strength of an advanced apprentice. Grimm already knew Wizard Kogan's estimation, so he generously let him do whatever he wanted. When Kogan brought the magical beasts into the wizard beast modification room, Grimm squinted his eyes and began to savor the taste. At this moment, Grimm finally understood the value of the elite-level magical beasts he had provided to his family. An elite-level magical beast leader that had been modified by a wizard beast had lost so much of its battle power. It had even fallen from elite level to the level of a normal wizard. The other magical beasts had also fallen below the level of a wizard. If he were to change these magical beasts into elemental crystal cores, Grimm could guarantee that they would all be above the level of a wizard. All of this probably depended on the AI chip's assistance. With the help of the chip, Grimm was able to maximize the power of the elemental crystal cores and turn them into perfect magical puppet crystal cores with the least amount of energy lost. Wizard Kogan did not have his own convenience, so he could only make up for it with his skillful methods and unique skills. This explained why Grimm's elite magical puppets could attract so much attention from his family. However, after comparing it with Wizard Kogan, Grimm suddenly realized that he could not be so realistic when he was making these magical puppets. Many times, he needed to go easy. He could not make the magical puppets too perfect. Otherwise, it would attract too much attention from his family. After Grimm returned to his residence, he opened the long wooden box that Wizard Kogan had given him. Immediately, the dense elemental aura began to quickly gather towards the wooden box. A bright glow appeared, so bright that Grimm could barely open his eyes. When he opened the wooden box, there were 7 neatly arranged elemental crystal cores inside. Without the restriction of the spell formation on the wooden box, coupled with the fact that the level 2 elemental essence core itself contained a trace of the aura of laws, even though the owner of the essence core had died, The corresponding elemental particles still lingered around the essence core like a trickle returning to the sea, continuously merging into it. What Grimm saw was a scene of Grade 2 elemental crystal cores flickering in and out of the misty fluorescence, as though they were breathing slowly. The regular elemental vibrations set off waves of ripples around the crystal cores, making them shine brighter and brighter. It was as if the crystal cores were covered in layers of elemental halos, making it look even more dazzling. The star core, the starlight, and the constantly dissipating fluorescent light made everything look like a dream. Inside, there was a mysterious principle that could make one's imagination run wild. Grimm stretched out his hand and gently stroked the elemental crystal core. The moment his slender fingertips touched the crystal core, the fire elemental aura in his body and the crystal core's elemental aura intertwined, causing ripples to form in his spiritual space. 3 wind elemental crystal cores, 2 fire elemental crystal cores, 1 darkness elemental crystal core, and 1 earth elemental crystal core. Different elemental crystal cores could give Grimm a completely different understanding of the elements. By analyzing the composition of the cores, Grimm would be able to better understand the differences between Type 2 creatures and Type 2 creatures. When a wizard leveled up, the core of their consciousness was mostly based on the real elemental crystal cores in the bodies of monsters. Hence, a long period of contact with these Class 2 elemental crystal cores was a great help to Grimm's subconscious influence. However, the longer he interacted with these crystal cores, the more questions Grimm had. The owner of these crystal cores had already died, and even their consciousness had disappeared a long time ago. What were these crystal cores relying on to maintain the existence of the law of nature? Could it be that the law of nature could break free from the shackles of the consciousness and solidify in a purely physical form? What was the essence of the law of nature? Where did its power come from? Stroking the beautiful crystal cores that were as bright as stars, Grimm's thoughts drifted, his heart filled with anticipation and desire for the truth of the world that was hidden behind layers of veils. Witchcraft. Witchcraft. In the end, it was still spells and spells. On the surface, witchcraft represented chaos and the unknown, while spells represented known methods and solidified laws. The two complemented each other and could not be dispensed with. Witchcraft represented the ancient Magi's pursuit of truth in the midst of chaos, and it was also their totem. On the other hand, the wizards of the current era only pursued spells that could bring them great power. Grimm, on the other hand, wanted to find a balance between witchcraft and spells. This way, he would be able to see the truth of the world and have the ability to protect himself so that he would not fall on the path of truth. Of course, this might be too greedy. However, since he had already come this far, what harm was there in being a little greedy? However, just as Grimm's thoughts ran wild as he stroked the elemental crystal cores, the AI Chip's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Beep. Successfully analyzed the mutated fire elemental rune. Requesting host's instructions to transmit information? What? The mutated fire elemental rune was already analyzed? Why did it take less than half of the estimated time? With all sorts of doubts, Grimm could not help but receive the data stream from the AI chip. With a slight stab of pain in his mind, Grimm felt his spiritual force evaporate by more than half. Only then did he manage to accept the unimaginably terrifying data stream. It was strange. Grimm had clearly received a stream of data that had been analyzed many times, but when it gathered in his mind, a strange rune burning with dark red flames formed in his spiritual space. Dark red flames? What the hell was this? Why did it give him a feeling of extreme danger? It was clearly a flame, but when Grimm probed it with his spiritual force, he could not help but feel as if his brain was going to explode in the next second. Strange, powerful, and dangerous, enduring the discomfort, Grimm's spiritual force connected to the strange fire elemental rune and finally understood its effects. Explosion rune. This was actually an explosion rune. Chapter 469. In the days that followed, Grimm entered the busiest period of his life. His mind that had withered after the training needed a long period of meditation to recover. The continuous tremors in his spiritual space needed to be nurtured slowly. Even though the mutated fire elemental runes he had just obtained had been completely analyzed by the AI chip, he still needed to continue experimenting if he wanted to turn them into his true battle strength. He needed to appraise the large number of Level 2 elemental essence crystals and build a data model. The strange changes to Bliss Body also needed to be created. The governance around the blazing flame monarch also needed to be standardized. The nurturing of the apprentices in the wizard's pagoda could not be ignored. Grimm, who had always been a loner, had never thought that forming a healthy faction would be so troublesome, or that the internal affairs of the wizard's pagoda would be so complicated. If not for the help of Merrill and Gargamel, he would not have been able to run the blazing flame monarch's pagoda in an orderly fashion. Only now did he understand why so many high-level magi would rather rely on a magus family than go out and create a new faction. It turned out that supporting a new faction was such a difficult and torturous task. There were not enough magi in the wizard's pagoda. Hence, under Merrill's strong request, even Grimm had to take up classes on high-level wizard techniques. Fortunately, he only had to take 2 days off every 2 weeks. Otherwise, Grimm would have chased all the apprentices away. Right now, he was like a clockwork top. He couldn't have a moment of peace. He spent his days shuttling between different wizard research labs, following up on 7 or 8 wizard research projects. Even when he had free time, he still had to make preparation for the magic puppets he was about to start. Perhaps the only time he could relax was when he closed his eyes and meditated after exhausting all of his mental energy. According to the AI chip's calculations, his spiritual space had never been peaceful ever since he started training, always in a state of constant turbulence. Correspondingly, the efficiency of his meditation had increased by quite a bit. This meant that the spiritual training technique he had modified based on his own conditions had the effect of improving his natural aptitude. The gnome cabbie had also successfully moved his gnome shop to the blazing flame monarch, becoming the biggest secret technique merchant in the wizard's pagoda. The goblin magic equipment it promoted was cheap, easy to operate, and had strange effects. It had also become a new thing that sorcerer apprentices were happy to try. If they wanted to lure the stupid ogres into the ambush from afar, the mechanical chickens were a good choice. The apprentices did not have enough wizard power, so the alchemy bombs could help them maintain their attack power when their wizard power was depleted. When the team was chased by terrifying monsters, the rocket boots could save their lives. When the prey hid in a dark cave and refused to come out, the self-exploding chickens could make it change its mind. Although these magical machines from another plane always had all kinds of problems, such as the wrong setting of the mechanical chicken, which would lead the ogres to the operator, or the alchemy bombs, which would only make 2 explosions when thrown, or the rocket boots, which would allow you to have intimate contact with a tree. No matter what, when you had an additional choice, life would always be more surprising or frightening than before. Taking advantage of the fact that the elemental magic puppets had just become famous, Grimm began to try to sell some of them in Cabbie's gnome shop. In the first batch of magic puppets, almost all of them were at the level of quasi-magi, and they were involved in a few branches of earth, fire, water, and wind. There were only 10 of them, and they were priced at an astonishing 1,100 magic crystals. According to Grimm's analysis, this price was a little high. After all, the basic reward for a mission for an ordinary sorcerer apprentice was around 20 to 30 magic crystals. Even the most dangerous missions would cost more than 100 magic crystals. The quasi-wizard magic puppets were definitely not attractive to wizards, and the apprentices could not afford them. It would be very difficult to sell them. However, Grimm had underestimated the passion of sorcerer apprentices to increase their own strength. If high-level sorcerer apprentices brought along a quasi-wizard helper when they went out, as long as they did not encounter a real sorcerer or a powerful quasi-wizard, they would be able to do whatever they wanted. For high-level sorcerer apprentices who were stuck in the middle of their journey, this was like a gift from the heavens. One apprentice might not be able to afford it, but 2 or 3 apprentices pooled their money together and managed to gather an astronomical sum of 1,100 magic crystals. Thus, many teams of apprentices who often went to the depths of the Black Forest to hunt for magical beasts used magic puppets in actual combat. Among these elemental magic puppets, the apprentices loved the stone puppets and rock pythons the most. With their help, the thick-skinned beasts and magical beasts would never be able to break through their formation. With these super meat shields, many exquisite teamwork and battle tactics could be used to their fullest potential. The magical beasts that required meat shields in the past could now be easily dealt with by a stone puppet. The probability of casualties in the team was greatly reduced, and the time needed to rest and recruit new teammates was also reduced. This way, the members of the team were fixed, and the level of teamwork increased exponentially. Furthermore, bringing the heavy prey back to the wizard's pagoda after every victory was no longer a problem. Due to the convenience and power of the elemental magic puppets, many teams of apprentices came up with a set of battle tactics, using the elemental magic puppets as the core of the team to create a different battle team. As the teams returned from the gnome shop with a full load of elemental magic puppets, the supply of elemental magic puppets gradually fell short. According to the feedback from the apprentices, Grimm found that the most popular low-level magic puppets were the earth and water element magic puppets. One had thick skin and could resist magical beasts, while the other had a large area of effect quagmire spell. Both were the most popular elemental magic puppets. In comparison, fire, wind, and poison element magic puppets were not favored by the apprentices, and some even rejected them. The main reason for this was that even though these magic puppets had powerful attacks, they were too destructive to the bodies of their prey. This would greatly reduce the quality of the spoils of war of the apprentices, reducing their magic crystal earnings. Thus, after learning from the first batch of magic puppets, Grimm changed the second batch of magic puppets he put into the gnome's shop a month later. They were all earth and water element magic puppets. Of course, to add to the fun, Grimm intentionally put in a wizard-level earth element magic puppet, Howler, wizard-level magic puppet, and it was the earth element magic puppet that the apprentices liked the most. This immediately caused a frenzy among the apprentices of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. Even though the price of 3,500 magic crystals was enough to stop most of the apprentices, it could not stop the enthusiasm of the prospective wizards. The gnome cabbie decided to go with the flow and held a small auction in the gnome's shop, allowing the prospective wizards to raise the price. After a heated auction, the veteran quasi-wizard Sabrina finally won the roar at the price of 5,200 magical crystals. That night, in order to test the power of the Howler magic puppet, Sabrina openly challenged the other 6 prospective wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda to a battle. Sabrina and the Howler against the other 6 prospective wizards. Would Sabrina be able to control a wizard-level magic puppet with her prospective wizard-level mental energy alone? Filled with endless questions, the 6 prospective wizards happily agreed to the battle and had a friendly match in the lava hall in front of the Wizard's Pagoda. The result was out of everyone's expectations. The combination of Sabrina and the Howler had defeated the 6 quasi-sorcerers effortlessly. The Howler, with its heavy, rumbling footsteps, possessed the abilities of Earth Tremor, Giant Rock Throw, and Rock Armor. It completely dominated the battlefield. Actually, with just the Howler's massive rock body, it carried the level 2 earthquake spell wherever it passed. An ordinary apprentice would not even be able to stand steadily beside it, much less fight it. Its heavy stone fists and giant rock throw seemed to be able to crush all the defensive wizard spells of apprentices. Even the prospective wizard known for his earth element defense would vomit blood after being slapped away by the Howler. The rest of the weaker ones did not even dare let the Howler's stone fists graze them. But when faced with such a barbaric fellow, could they just attack with wizard spells from a distance? Then the Howler would immediately gather a massive amount of earth element between its palms and launch a long-range throw. To be honest, Anyone who saw a rock larger than a horse carriage rolling toward them would not have the mood to continue chanting wizard spells. They would only scream and run as fast as they could. What Sabrina needed to do was to control the howler to casually walk through the crowd, then force a few prospective wizards to raise their hands and surrender. This was a one-sided battle. After the battle, the few prospective wizards gathered together to ponder over the painful experience and came to this conclusion. Unless they could find a way to restrict the howler's rampage, they would not have the time to focus fire on this big fellow. The howler's rock body was half a meter thick, and coupled with its rock armor that could continuously repair, it was not something that could be destroyed with just 2 or 3 wizard spells. Hence, this also proved the powerful dominance of wizard-level magic puppets over wizard acolytes. Along with Grimm's magic puppet craze, Gargamel also began to vigorously promote internal contribution points within the Blazing Flame Monarch. As long as every wizard acolyte completed the missions issued by the Wizard's Pagoda, they would receive a corresponding amount of contribution points in addition to regular magic crystals. With these contribution points, they could enter the internal library of the Wizard's Pagoda or purchase some special items of the Blazing Flame Monarch, such as custom-made magic puppets, high-level wizard potions, or personal tutelage by a wizard. In short, using these methods, Grimm and Gargamel once again spread the name of the Blazing Flame Monarch. Chapter 470. The Tower of Destiny. The daily morning prayer ceremony had just ended. Close to 100 witches' apprentices left the ceremony hall one after another. Only Chef was left behind, silently waiting for Alice's orders. After half a year together, Alice, Chef, and Sophia's relationship was much better than before. Especially under Chef's mediation, the relationship between Alice and the Deceit Witches was much better. Even the leader of the Deceit Witches welcomed Alice to visit the Moya family when the time was right. To Alice, this was good news no matter what. "Alice, why did you ask me to stay behind?" Chef could not help but ask curiously after bowing and waiting for a long time, only to see Alice frowning silently in a daze. Today, Alice suddenly woke up and could not help but murmur, "There will be a guest from afar coming to visit. I hope you can help me receive her." Chef looked up at Alice's complicated eyes and asked softly, "Will she make a move?" Alice first nodded, then shook her head and said in distress, "I'm not sure." Chef could not help but be even more surprised. Ever since Alice officially became a Witch of Destiny, there was almost nothing she could not solve within her abilities. Could it be a high-grade Magus this time? Just as Chef could not help but speculate, Alice had already seen through her thoughts and smiled bitterly. "It's not an enemy, but a former sister of mine. My relationship with her is very complicated. Meeting her like this might cause conflict, so before meeting her, I need to do some divination." "Understood," Chef nodded. "I will receive her personally. I promise I won't let her cause any trouble." After Shui Fu walked out of the hall, Alice sighed silently. She turned to the little elf on her shoulder and instructed, "Go prepare the astrological platform on the top floor. I'll go there immediately after I'm done bathing." The little elf was dozing off in boredom and immediately became excited when she heard this. "Helen will go now. I promise I'll arrange everything properly." Elemental elves like her love places with strong elemental aura, and every time Alice held a divination ceremony on the top floor, she would gather the majestic power of destiny. Being able to smell the aura of destiny from the side was also a rare and wonderful enjoyment in the boring life of an elemental elf. Looking at Helen flapping her translucent wings and flying further and further away in a trail of starlight, Alice turned to face the west and couldn't help but let out a soft sigh again. Tower of Destiny, 30 miles west. In the azure sky, 5 strangely shaped bats flapped their wide bat wings, streaking across the sky like sharp arrows, flying with all their might toward the tall Wizard's Pagoda at the end of the horizon. Below them was the remote and desolate Dragonbone wasteland. There was barely any greenery on the vast land. In his line of sight, apart from the yellow-brown soil, There were also piles of huge skeletons buried in the sand. The wind gently blew across the ground, and when it passed through the gaps between the giant bones, it would occasionally let out a sobbing sound similar to the weeping of souls. Groups of monsters could be seen in the wilderness from time to time. This place was simply a cursed place filled with ominous signs. Even when flying over the Dragonbone wasteland, Mary could smell the thick dragon soul curse power. Master, why do I feel a chill in my heart? This place seems a little creepy. Winlier, who was extremely sensitive to the outside world, couldn't help but ask as he flew. Of course it's creepy. Mary sneered in disdain. Back then, the most powerful Witch of Destiny sacrificed 9 giant dragons here for this Tower of Destiny. That's why this place is called Dragonbone Wasteland. Master, you mean that what we saw just now were dragon bones? Winlier was so shocked that he almost fell from the sky. Maybe not. Mary shook her head. Don't even think about getting those dragon bones. If they were so easy to get, do you think they would still be here for tens of thousands of years? The dragon curse power here is disgusting. Let's leave quickly. After saying that, the few of them increased their speed and flew toward the Tower of Destiny as fast as arrows without alarming the groups of monsters roaming around them. When Mary and the rest arrived at the Tower of Destiny, it was already nightfall. The dark night shrouded the Dragonbone wasteland. Sparse stars appeared at the end of the horizon. The tall spire of the Tower of Destiny lit up with a dazzling light. A beautiful elemental halo appeared around the tower, rippling outwards. It was a beautiful sight against the dark night sky. Is there a divination ceremony going on? Could it have something to do with my arrival? Thinking slowly, Mary descended when she was still half a mile away from the Tower of Destiny. With that glimpse, Mary could clearly see a lonely, pretty figure standing quietly at the door of the tall Tower of Destiny, as if waiting for something. Since you're here, please come into the tower. Xue Fu has been waiting here for a long time on the orders of the Tower Master. With her superhuman senses, even though she couldn't see Mary, Xue Fu knew that the person she was waiting for had arrived. You're not Alice? In the darkness, Mary walked with determined steps toward the wizard's pagoda. Her red eyes stared at the other party without blinking. This was a beautiful witch with an arrogant and demonic charm. She was tall and slender, with a curvaceous body. Her skin was translucent and fair, and her face was exquisite and perfect. Her bright red lips held a cold smile. What attracted the most attention was the pair of red eyes that shone in the darkness. They were translucent like 2 perfect rubies, exceptionally mesmerizing. You must be Lady Mary? Xue Fu sized up Mary, and her heart trembled. She lowered her head and bowed according to Alice's instructions. Lady Alice is already waiting for your arrival in the tower. Please follow me. With that, Xue Fu turned around and disappeared into the door of the wizard's pagoda. What a show of strength. Mary smiled coldly. The Tower of Destiny stood before her, and this was undoubtedly Alice's home turf. If she didn't go in, wouldn't it mean that she was afraid of her? But if she entered her territory, she might really be tricked by her. Even though she was still hesitating, Mary's body did not hesitate to step into the light membrane and enter the Tower of Destiny. Behind the light membrane was the Wizard Hall on the first level of the Tower of Destiny. At this moment, it was obviously the time for the witches' apprentices to do whatever they wanted. They gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, chattering and laughing, discussing problems in low voices, or setting up a small stall to sell the little things they had made. When they saw Xue Fu, they immediately moved to the side of the road and bowed. Xue Fu maintained her cold demeanor, leading Mary to the top level of the tower. Mary followed behind him. Her scarlet eyes gently swept across the hall, almost seeing through all the witch apprentices. Among the 100 witch apprentices, there was not a single prospective wizard, and the strongest was only a high-level apprentice. 60 to 70% of them were beginner apprentices. This level of apprentices was not worthy of the Tower of Destiny in front of her. As the leader of the Witches of Destiny, and one of the powerhouses of the Northern Witches, her strength was actually weaker than the team that Grimm had casually assembled in the Blazing Flame Monarch. This Alice seemed to be doing much worse than she had imagined. Xuefu brought Mary to a guest hall on the 8th level of the tower and sat with her in silence. It was obvious that Xuefu was not good at conversing, and Mary was not someone who would look for things to talk about. Hence, the two sat opposite each other, quietly waiting with their eyes closed. Not long after, Xuefu began to meditate without saying a word. Mary opened her red eyes and looked at Xuefu's jade-like skin, her eyes filled with unconcealable surprise. That Alice really had a big heart. She actually sent such a subordinate to receive him. Wasn't she afraid that she would suddenly attack? At such a distance, Mary was 100% sure that she would be able to kill her before her opponent could react. Another hour passed, and the dense torrent of fate on the top level of the Tower of Destiny began to subside, as if the divination ceremony had ended. As expected, a sweet female voice sounded in the guest hall half an hour later. "Sister Mary, you really came?" After saying that, a beautiful woman with a slender and graceful figure wearing a purple starry robe walked into the hall. "Alice." Mary stood up in confusion. Although she had heard that Alice's body and appearance had changed dramatically after she became a Destiny, which, the contrast between the woman in front of her and the image of the Lolita in her mind was too great. This made her unable to accept it for a moment. "Sister Mary, I am so happy that you came to see me as soon as you came back." Alice smiled sweetly as she walked to Mary's side. Xuefu stood up silently and moved behind Alice. "Happy? What is there to be happy about?" Mary said coldly. "Didn't your divination skill tell you that I am here to fight you?" Alice's smile froze. This Mary was still so straightforward. She had already acted so kind, but the other party was still so unforgiving. "Cough. Seems like I can only use that move." Alice slowly put away her smile and looked at Mary, who was full of fighting spirit, and said calmly, "We are not enemies, but allies." "I know we are allies." Mary's answer was still straightforward. "I have already fought with Grimm. I can't beat him, so I will listen to him. Now I want to fight with you. Whoever wins will have to be obedient in the future." What a strong logic. Chapter 471. Unfortunately, the battle that Mary had been planning for a long time did not start. Alice, on the other hand, used a single sentence to extinguish her opponent's surging desire for battle. "Sister Mary, don't you want to get rid of the bloodline binding you?" Seeing that Mary was eager to fight at any time, Alice could only take out her trump card. The words bloodline binding were like a sharp awl, piercing into Mary's heart. Her bloody eyes widened, her long hair fluttered, and the bat wings behind her suddenly spread open. Her fighting spirit was raised to the limit. "What did you say?" Mary's expression suddenly became cruel and fierce, and she approached Alice with her claws and fangs bared. "I said, I have a way for you to find the vampire who bestowed your bloodline." Alice was not moved by Mary's abnormal state at all, and her tone did not change at all. Behind her, Xuefu's skin suddenly became more translucent, and the violent and ferocious snowstorm lingered in her body, looking like it was about to erupt. When Mary had got within 5 paces of Alice, she did not go any further. She could feel that if she took half a step forward, the person behind Alice who manipulated the ice and snow would explode. Her surging aura pressed down on Alice's body tightly, and her blood-red eyes stared at her without blinking for a moment. Alice did not dodge at all, and looked straight into Mary's eyes that were filled with power and anger, and there was incomparable determination and confidence in her eyes. At this moment, Mary finally understood. Alice, who had always been a little girl in her eyes, had indeed grown up. Not only was her temperament strong to the point that it surprised her, but even her knowledge seemed to be much higher than hers. At this moment, standing in front of her was no longer the black-bellied little girl who pretended to be cute, but a real witch whose temperament was immeasurably mature. Mary had made up her mind on the way here that she would have to fight Alice first, no matter what excuse she might come up with. But the bloodline binding that Alice mentioned really moved her. This could be said to be the eternal pain in the hearts of all foreign vampires. As foreign vampires, they were different from the real vampires. Most genuine vampires were the descendants of vampire families. Their bloodline was passed down from generation to generation. Therefore, there were almost no restrictions on the bloodline. On the other hand, most of the foreign vampires were genuine vampires who turned ordinary humans into their own kind through the embrace. As for Mary, she was even more special. She was a mutated vampire that Wizard Anderson had accidentally obtained using a vampire's blood and used witchcraft to modify and nurture it. So seriously speaking, Mary should be called a bloodline contaminator. It was because of these accidents that Mary felt a serious bloodline conflict after she became an elite sorcerer. If she did not find a way to resolve the hidden danger rooted in her soul and bloodline, she was afraid that in this lifetime, elite sorcerer would be the limit of her strength. Even if she wanted to increase her strength, that inexplicable bloodline restriction would make all her efforts go up in smoke. The only way to change this was to suck the vampire's blood dry and become a real vampire. These were originally hidden secrets in the depths of Mary's heart. Who would have thought that they would be exposed by Alice here? Therefore, it was no wonder that she was so excited that she almost lost control of her power. After taking a few deep breaths and trying hard to suppress the violent nature in her heart, Mary finally found her reason. "Speak. I want to hear your conditions." Mary put away her threatening look and began to talk to Alice in a manner of equal. "I know the whereabouts of the vampire you are looking for." Alice's tense face finally showed a trace of a smile. "Where is he?" Mary could not help but ask anxiously. "Is there a point in asking this?" Alice asked with a smile. "Do you think you can kill him with your men if you know where he is?" "Why not?" Alice put a hand to her forehead in pain. "Vampires have absolute control over their bloodline descendants. Do you think you can still stand in front of that vampire and talk to him? That vampire does not even need to fight you. He only needs to use the bloodline connection to order you to kill yourself, and you will probably choke yourself to death." Mary's body trembled uncontrollably. In the other plane, she had also unscrupulously concocted blood thralls and derivatives. In her eyes, those people were simply the cheapest slaves and cannon fodder. They had no privacy or rights at all. When she needed to leave that plane, she even cruelly activated the blood shackles and turned the hundreds of subordinates that she could not take with her into nourishment for her growth. She swallowed them in one gulp. When she did all these things, it was as if everything was so natural and right. But now, there was a person who was above her, and he was going to put all of this on her as well. Mary's anger and fear could be imagined. The more she thought about it, the more clear it became. Mary's mind was unprecedentedly calm and rational. She raised her head and stared at Alice. She carefully and slowly asked, "Then what do you think I should do?" "You don't have to worry too much." Alice explained unhurriedly. "I've found your mortal enemy. Fortunately, he is still a grade 1 vampire. So, if we use our strength, we still have a chance to get rid of him. But if we want to get rid of him, you definitely can't make a move. You don't even dare to get close to him. So, I have to personally arrange people. These vampires are very vigilant. If we fail, it will easily alert him. Then, it will be much more difficult to find him again." "Understand." Mary sighed and spoke again. "I owe you for this. In exchange, I will do my best to do something for you. No matter how dangerous it is, I won't back down." Alice breathed a long sigh of relief. She stepped forward and held Mary's hand. She smiled softly. "Since we have reached an agreement, we are naturally good sisters." "Oh yes, Sister Mary, did you know? I used to have a grandmother who loved me very much. But she..." At this point, Alice's azure blue eyes suddenly turned red. Tears rolled down her cheeks. What happened to her? Mary gritted her teeth and asked. She was detained by bad people and locked in a terrible place. She is constantly being tortured. Seeing that Alice was about to cry again, Mary knew that there was a big trap in front of her. But for the so-called bloodline binding, she had to go all out. "Okay, don't cry," Mary said irritably. "Don't you just want me to help you save her? Tell me the location and the people. I will go now." Alice, who was choking with sobs just now, immediately smiled. She held Mary's hand and shook it. As expected, Sister Mary cares about Alice the most. Alice will definitely do her best to do things for Sister Mary. After saying that, she quietly went to Mary's ear and whispered a few words. Sure enough, the so-called enemy turned out to be the Dark Witch. This Alice had really found a good opponent for herself. With boundless resentment, Mary sighed and turned to leave. The beehive. As the nest of the Abebe bee-men, the security of the beehive was undoubtedly the strictest. But these days, the appearance of a mysterious specter made the powerful Abebe bee-men fall into endless panic. For more than a month, hundreds of bee-men warriors went missing. This was the gift that the mysterious specter brought to the Abebe bee-men. Moreover, as the mysterious specter grew stronger, he was no longer satisfied with waiting for the bee-men hunting teams to fall into his trap. He began to take the initiative to attack the bee-men's territory. Now, even patrolling in the forest near the beehive was no longer safe. With no other choice, the bee-men commander could only try to shrink the defense line and increase the number of bee-men hunting teams from the initial 15 to the current 30. Due to the lack of food, the Beeman Queen's rapid expansion of her tribe was curbed. The number of Beeman warriors in the beehive decreased from the peak of 560 to the current 436. The hunting teams also decreased from the maximum of 25 to the current 10. The blow to the beehive was simply indescribable. After a detailed investigation by the Beemen, they finally figured out that it was not a monster that kept sneaking attacks on the Beemen hunting teams, but a human wizard apprentice. This was also the question that the Abebe bee-men could not understand. How did an ordinary human sorcerer apprentice manage to devour so many beekeeper warriors? They finally got the answer to this question through some of the bee-men warriors that managed to escape. That damned human sorcerer apprentice was actually walking the path of a terrifying bloodline sorcerer. He could transform into a horrifying insectoid, and by devouring the bodies of Beeman warriors, he could continue to grow stronger and hatch some strange scorpions as his own soldiers. The scorpions he hatched could hide underground. This was also the main reason why the beehive could not find them despite sending out so many search teams. In order to protest against the enemies overstepping their boundaries, the Abebe bee-men even sent messengers to the human wizard's pagoda to complain. Unfortunately, the skinny human wizard who looked like a large mouse actually brought out the peace agreement they had signed and told the Beeman messengers while spitting spittle. The wizard's pagoda's wizard stayed obediently in the wizard's pagoda and never stepped foot into the territory of the magical creatures. As for the wizard apprentice's actions, it was not within the jurisdiction of the peace agreement. So, the Blazing Flame Monarch was not responsible for the insect apprentice's actions. If the Abebe bee-men could not stand the sight of him, they could kill him and eat him. It would be futile to complain to the human wizard's pagoda, and they could not ask for help from the other magical creatures around them. Chapter 472. The Black Forest in the afternoon was unusually hot and humid. The tall and straight tree trunks propped up a huge canopy that looked like an umbrella. The tall ancient trees were not far from each other. Their crowns, branches, and vines were all mixed together, forming a dense and deep sea of trees. A faint mist floated in the forest. Sunlight seeped through the gaps between the branches and leaves, forming a slanted pillar of light that decorated the forest like a dream. There were no sounds of beasts or insects in the forest. The soil at the base of a tall, ancient tree suddenly rumbled, and a head-sized mound rose up. Countless black beetles surged out from it and gathered into a wriggling human shape. This bugman made of countless beetles stood silently for a while, as if it was communicating with some of its subordinates in the distance. A moment later, the bugman raised its head and turned to look in the direction of the Abebe bee-men's hive. Its heart was filled with doubts. The Abebe bee-men had actually given up on the outer hunting area and the inner living area. All of them had retreated back to their hive. This was obviously out of his expectations. But after some thought, Bliss deduced the possible actions of the Abebe bee-men from the knowledge crystal that Grimm had sent him. The knowledge crystal that Grimm had sent him was quite rich in content. It almost covered the origin of the Abebe bee-men, The structure of their race, the way they ruled, the way they operated their power, the basic data of their members, their fighting style, and the characteristics of their profession. With this data, Bliss could basically beat up these low-grade monsters that were enough to drown his little bug army. Bliss could even set up all kinds of traps and wait for the bee-men to come to him. Bliss could still find the answers he needed from the knowledge crystal about the Abebe bee-men's abnormal actions. The blood locust wasps were probably the only thing that the Abebe bee-men could rely on. The blood locust wasps were terrifying creatures from another world. They had the power of a magus and were one of the few Abebe bee-men that could surpass the magus rank. For any Abebe bee-man tribe to maintain the existence of a blood locust wasps, they had to sacrifice the lives of 3 to 5 bee-men warriors every day. Therefore, unless the Bee Queen's tribe grew to more than 1,000 members, she would not easily hatch such a terrifying creature that devoured both her enemies and herself. Now, the Abbe bee-men were going crazy from the torture of this annoying bugman, so they couldn't care less about these taboos. They were ready to quickly hatch a blood locust bee to deal with Blitz. According to the knowledge crystal, the blood locust swarm had a strong body that was not weaker than a beginner anatomy refinery wizard. They flew extremely fast, and their terrifying guillotine mouthparts could eat raw steel. Not to mention the fact that Blitz's newly hatched scorpions were no match for it. Even Blitz was in danger of being hunted down and killed. I can't afford to offend him, then I'll just hide. Blitz was not a mindless wild monster that would eat to death if it stared at one. Anyway, the mission given to him by Master was to contain the Abebe bee people. Now that he had basically accomplished that, there was no need for him to stay here and fight them to the death. Return to the wizard's pagoda? At the thought of the forest demon's aggressive appearance, Blitz's heart burned with a vicious killing intent. But that forest demon seemed to be the partner of another rat, and that rat was Master's assistant. It looked like he could not easily deal with it. Since I'm not going back to the wizard's pagoda, I'll find trouble with other magical creatures. Master said that the 3-headed magic hound and the Medusa were his traps, and he could not easily deal with them. Then there were not many choices left. Twin-legged flying dragons? No, they could fly, and it would be difficult for them to hunt. Giant barbarian elephants? That would not work either. Their strength and physique were ridiculously strong. With the abilities of the young scorpions, there was no way they could harm them, no matter how he thought about it. It seemed like the crimson flame tigers and ogres were more suitable for him. Blitz's abilities were improving rapidly, and he would probably become a high-level apprentice in another 2 or 3 meals. When that time came, the explosive increase in his mental energy would allow him to control more subordinates, and his battle power would also increase significantly. I'll choose the ogres. They had sufficient numbers, and they were lacking in wizard spells. They were perfect for watering his insect army. After thinking about it, Blitz hesitated no longer. His entire body suddenly collapsed, turning back into countless tiny beetles that burrowed into the ground, then pounced toward the ogre camp in the northeast. Behind him, 7 young scorpions the size of wash basins also burrowed quickly into the ground. On the ground, the 7 mounds of soil quickly moved into the distance. Flame Monarch. An earth-shattering boom resounded. The entire wizard's pagoda trembled slightly. Due to a small mistake, the rune lines inscribed on the level 2 elemental essence crystal were slightly off, and the magical energy became chaotic, resulting in a terrifying explosion. This explosion had clearly exceeded the tolerance of the alchemy laboratory's defensive spell formation. The terrifying shock wave spread out, even affecting the entire wizard's pagoda. Grimm opened the door to the laboratory, and he ran out, covered in a thick cloud of black smoke. Behind him, the entire laboratory was in a mess. Broken pieces of the alchemy workbench littered the ground, and the continuous explosions rang out. Corgan, Gargamel, and Meryl rushed to the door after hearing the news. "Are you all right? Are you all right, Master? Are you hurt, Teacher?" 3 people, 3 different greetings, but all they got in return was a series of violent coughs from Grimm. Grimm's youthful face was pale, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. On his body, there were a few large holes in his black robe, and there were still some sparks burning. From the looks of it, it was clear that his mind and body had been damaged by the explosion of the elemental essence crystal core. In that kind of environment, any defensive spell would not be able to withstand the continuous explosions caused by the elemental essence crystal core. Even the mind could easily be affected by the elemental shock. Cough. Too bad. Grim coughed violently, feeling extremely vexed. Just a little bit more, and it would have been done. My mental power still couldn't keep up. Grim, don't be too anxious. Although Wizard Corgan was disappointed that a level 2 elemental essence crystal core was destroyed just like that, he still needed to comfort Grim on the surface. The mission given to you by the family is still very generous. Don't be in such a rush to try it. It's better to be more stable. Gargamel and Meryl couldn't interrupt in a situation like this, so they could only gather around Grim and help him deal with the more obvious wounds on his body. After resting for a while, Grim's spirit was already a lot better. It's really a pity this time. Just a little bit more, but I was too anxious and I still failed. You don't have to be so anxious. You really don't have to be so anxious. From what I see, you need to be more stable. Also, I finished modifying those wizard beasts you asked me to. There's still a lot of things waiting for me to take care of in the family, so I won't be staying here any longer. Grim had been staying in the lab for the past few days, so Corgan almost never saw him. Therefore, he took this opportunity to say goodbye. Of course, Grim was full of gratitude. He asked Gargamel to bring over the promised reward and personally handed it to Wizard Corgan. Although they were wizard from the same family, they couldn't just do a mission like this for free. Therefore, the necessary reward was necessary. After Gargamel personally sent Wizard Corgan off, the three of them once again gathered in the secret room on the 4th floor of the Wizard's Pagoda. Teacher, is your body really okay? Do you need to meditate and check yourself? Meryl asked with concern. Grim's hunched back suddenly straightened, and his originally dispirited spirit suddenly became full again. Master, how did it go? Gargamel was obviously also involved in this matter. He was nervously rubbing his hands and staring at Grim with a pair of green bean eyes. Meryl was confused by the actions of the two, and her beautiful eyes could not help but look back and forth between them. Grim did not answer. Instead, he gently swiped his right hand across his waist and flipped it over. A dazzling, crystal-clear magic puppet crystal core appeared in front of them. It's done. It's done. It's really done. Gargamel immediately danced with joy as he threw himself in front of Grim. He stared at the demon puppet crystal core with his rat-like eyes, his goatee trembling non-stop. Unfortunately, when it came to shiny gems, women were 10 times more sensitive and flexible than men. Before Gargamel could even stretch out his trembling hands, the magic puppet crystal core had already fallen into Meryl's hands. Meryl repeatedly played with the magic puppet crystal core as if she could not bear to part with it. Is this the elite elemental magic puppet you were talking about? Shouldn't it have been destroyed? Why is it still here? Could it be that you were acting? Grim and Gargamel did not reply, but they both let out a sinister laugh. Teacher, even you've been led astray by the sinister Gargamel. This must have been Gargamel's idea. How evil. Meryl rolled her eyes at Gargamel and continued to play with the precious gem. Gargamel was choked by Meryl's words. He almost couldn't help but shout that this was all Grim's idea, and he was only the one who handled it. Unfortunately, his words were suppressed by Grim's dignified glare. He could only take the blame for this in silence. To be honest, I did not expect to succeed on my first try, so I made some preparations. Fortunately, my luck was good and I managed to succeed. I also managed to deceive that Gen a little. Grim sighed with emotion. Oh right, only the two of you are allowed to know about this. The other members are not allowed to know. Then what about Ava? Gargamel rolled his eyes. It could be seen that this Gargamel was obedient to the forest demon AI Wah, like an obedient baby. Grim paused for a moment and could only change his words. Only the three of you and Ava are allowed to know. no one else is allowed to know. Chapter 473. Nire Valley. Mary was carefully moving through a shadowy forest. Everything around her was pitch black, and she could see shadows of different shades everywhere. She could vaguely feel the faint aura of life in many of the shadows. Mary had to be very careful to avoid the shadows, because each shadow was actually a twisted and evil shadow creature. They densely covered the entire valley, tightly guarding all the paths leading to the Black Wizard Tower. These shadow creatures might not be very strong, but in Mary's eyes, they were weak life forms that could be destroyed with a single blow. However, in order to avoid alerting the enemy, she could only conceal all her life aura and carefully move through the dense shadow sentries. As a foreign vampire, Mary could easily control the temperature of her blood, thus avoiding the detection of infrared perception and life perception. Coupled with her agility in stealth, these shadow creatures with average strength of an intermediate apprentice would not be able to detect her presence at all. The reason why Mary was so careful was not because of them, but to avoid the shadow mastiffs that moved through the Nire Valley from time to time. They were like the hounds of the material world, with a highly developed sense of smell, and could sniff out the movement of any non-shadow element. Fortunately, Mary was wearing the deception orb that Alice gave her. Under the cover of the strange aura, as long as she was not directly seen by these shadow creatures, she would not have to worry about being seen through. This place was also known as the Black Secret Realm, and it was also the area where the Dark Witch Tower was located. If it wasn't for the promise she made to Alice, Mary would not have come here to seek death, even if she had lost her mind. After all, there were rank 2 and 3 Dark Witches stationed here all year round. Even the leader of the rank 4 Dark Witches, Circe, spent more than half of a year in this place. Even with Mary's fearless personality, she could not help but tremble slightly at the thought of so many high-grade wizards. No one could bear the crime of plotting to sneak into the Dark Witches' origin land. Therefore, if Mary did not want to be hunted down by the Dark Witches all over the world, the only thing she could do was to hide her identity. Just as Mary was moving through the shadow of a gray tree, she suddenly felt a sense of danger. Her body flew up lightly and silently climbed onto a gray tree. Then, she squeezed gently and became one with the gray shadow of the tree. Even though her movements were swift and silent, and she didn't release any aura, she still inevitably caused a trace of wind elemental energy to flow. In the next second, 5 shadow mastiffs emerged from the shadows and sniffed around. In addition to the strong smell of shadows, there was also a trace of wind element in the air. Although they were in the depths of the Shadow Valley, and the overly dense shadow substance repelled most of the magical elements in the physical world, it was not too strange for a small amount of wind elements to enter through the gaps in the shadows. Therefore, the shadow mastiffs spread out and patrolled. When they didn't find anything, they relaxed their vigilance. Thus, with a slight shadow fluctuation, the 5 shadow mastiffs instantly appeared in another shadow 100 meters away through Shadow Leap and continued their patrol. After a long while, Mary finally squirmed out of the shadow of the big tree after confirming that there were no signs of trouble in the surroundings. Seriously speaking, this was no longer the wizard world. The Dark Witches, with the powerful power of the Wizard's Pagoda, actually made a small area of the wizard world overlap with the legendary Shadow Dimension. The overlapping area was also the area covered by the Shadow Forest in the Nile Valley. This way, the Dark Witches could continuously organize their forces to explore the vast Shadow Dimension, which had a space comparable to the wizard world. The benefits from this were also obvious. However, the origin Wizard's Pagoda of the Dark Witches, as the core of the anchoring of the 2 dimensions, was always in the process of the conflict between the 2 origins of the dimension. Thus, the periodic eruptions of shadows and the surprise attacks of the aboriginals of the Shadow Dimension would have a negative impact on the stability of the Shadow Valley. With Mary's strength as a level 1 vampire wizard, it was simply impossible for her to break into the tightly guarded origin wizard's tower of the Dark Witches. But as long as Alice was there, she could always find a crack in the tightest wall for you to walk through. Thus, Mary moved forward step by step. It took her almost 3 days to travel 4 miles, and she was still 2 or 3 miles away from the towering dark tower. But when she reached here, she did not move forward anymore. Instead, she found a slightly quiet clearing in the forest and slowly squeezed her body into the soil between reality and illusion. From now on, until the eruption of the shadow, tied a month later, she had to be nailed to this place like a nail. If not for the spatial turbulence caused by the shadow tide, she would not have any chance of breaking into the Origin Wizard's Tower of the Dark Witches. Only when the shadow tide washed and shook this overlapping area would she have the opportunity to take the risk. Of course, what the so-called shadow tide was. When it would erupt, Mary had no idea. But even if she did not know, it did not mean that Alice, who controlled the Tower of Destiny, did not know. Alice, who was always watching the Dark Tower, had already planned all the rescue plans. The only thing she lacked was a powerful wizard like Mary, who had the talent of an assassin. Alice had made up her mind to rescue her only relative, the poisoned centipede, from Endor. As for the consequences, she did not care about anything. Stonehammer Camp. This was a large ogre camp in the depths of the dark forest. The ogre's Stonehammer Mountain had been burned to the ground by Grimm, and it had become a barren mountain. Therefore, the ogres simply set up a huge camp on the mountain, using sharp wooden stakes that were sharpened at one end and as thick as a person's arms wrapped around the entire mountain. The powerful elite ogre warriors, the small leaders, and the terrifying twin-headed ogre wizard naturally lived in the belly of the mountain, while most of the ordinary ogres built simple shacks on the mountainside and lived in them. Due to the lack of planning and decorations, every ogre wandered around as they pleased. The shacks they built were also scattered here and there. They were colorful, and the atmosphere was foul and chaotic. When the sun rose, the small leaders of the ogres came out from the belly of the mountain. As they walked towards the tall gate at the foot of the mountain, they used their thick black feet to wake up the sleeping ogres. Get up, all of you get up, you lazy bums. You don't do much work, but you eat a lot. Smelly head, blackface, get up. It's time to go hunting. Under his continuous beating and cursing, the ogres grumbled as they crawled out of their shacks and empty spaces. They swayed their huge bodies and followed behind the small leader, heading down the mountain. For a time, the entire Stonehammer camp was filled with tall and strong figures. Shouting and cursing could be heard everywhere, and it was bustling like a huge market. There were a total of 87 large and small ogres in the ogre camp. There were 43 adult male ogres, 22 adult female ogres, 14 underage ogre warrior candidates, and 8 ogre cubs. Although the number of adult ogres was only half of the total, for a savage and savage race like the ogres, there were no incompetent ogres who would just eat and wait to die. Almost all of them were tyrannical warriors. Even the female ogres or underage ogres could easily smash the heads of elite human warriors with a wooden stick that was as thick as a human's leg. In the ogre camp, if any ogre reached the age of old and did not die, they would be chased out of the tribe and become a wandering ogre. That was why the ogre camp did not keep useless people who had lost the ability to fight. On a high cliff 5 miles away from Stonehammer Mountain, Billis stood at the top of the cliff, silently watching the black mass of ogres rush out of the gate and disperse into the surrounding dark forest. Unlike the bee-men, the ogres formed a small team of 3. Most of the weapons they used were thick wooden sticks and stone sticks that they had ground themselves. Their hunting range was hundreds of miles wide. For adult ogres, if they ran at full speed, they would have no problem running 70 to 80 miles in the morning. This was a testament to their extraordinary strength and physique. Strictly speaking, ogres were also a type of creature that resembled humans. They looked like humans that had been magnified several times. Their bodies were exceptionally strong, and their strength was even greater. They were huge, ugly, and greedy magical creatures. Although they were strong, they were simple-minded. Even adult ogres only had the intelligence of a 5-year-old human child. Only mutated ogre sorcerers could break through the limits of intelligence and become terrifying monsters that believed in violence and were cruel and bloodthirsty. Regular ogre warriors had 7 points of strength and 9 points of vitality, according to the sorcerer system. The twin-headed ogre Zack had 11 points of strength, 13 points of vitality, and a whopping 4 points of spirit. Among human sorcerers, 4 points of spirit could only be considered an average sorcerer. However, among the ogres, it was an enviable figure with high intelligence. Villas lowered his head and pondered. Compared to the ogres, the young thorn scorpions he had bred had 4 points of strength, 5 points of vitality, and 2 points of spirit. With these stats, the young thorn scorpions would have a slight advantage in a head-on clash with the Beemen. However, in a head-on clash with the ogres, they would not be able to withstand a single attack from an adult ogre. It seemed that he could only defeat them with his wits. Chapter 474. Without sufficient stamina, it would be difficult to follow the footsteps of the ogres. The ogre warriors did not stop as they sprinted towards the forest in the distance. After half a year of continuous raids, there were no longer any large creatures that could fill their stomachs within 20 to 30 miles of Sledgehammer Mountain. Hence, to bring back enough prey, the ogres could only advance further. Bliss, who knew nothing about the habits of the ogres, did not expect such a situation. He led the 7 young scorpions and sprinted for more than 40 miles before he finally found the messy battlefield left behind by the ogres. This time, it was a litter of razor boars. They were one of the most commonly seen wild beasts in the dark forest. The razor boars did not possess any elemental powers, only a heavy and sturdy body and a pair of razor-like tusks. Adult razor boars could weigh up to 100 kilograms. With the amber-like resin and gravel mixture on their bodies, it was as though they were wearing a thick layer of armor. In the dark forest, a berserk razor boar could break a tree so thick that it would take 2 men to wrap their arms around it. It was a pity that they encountered the ogre hunting team that was stronger and more skilled in hunting. Hence, this litter of 2 adult razor boars and 3 piglets became the prey of the 3 ogres. While the ogres liked cooked food, they did not know how to start a fire in the wild, so they could only make do with eating and drinking. As warriors who were out hunting, they naturally had the right to fill their stomachs first. Hence, after the hunt was successful, the 3 ogres tied up the 2 unconscious razor boars with tree vines and sat on the ground. Each of them carried a piglet and cut open its abdomen. They dug out its intestines and threw them away, then dug out its heart and started munching on it. In the simple and crude minds of the ogres, they believed that the source of power for all creatures came from the heart. Hence, to make themselves stronger and more powerful, it became their tradition to chew on the heart first. However, while they were chewing and tearing at each other until blood flowed everywhere, a pair of dark green insect-like compound eyes already locked onto them from the nearby forest. Under Bliss's remote control, the 7 scorpions crawled underground in their own unique way. They bit off the roots of the ancient trees and dug through the solid soil, quietly hiding under the 3-headed ogre. The ogres lived up to their reputation as magical creatures. Although they didn't hear anything, they could sense that something was amiss from the slight tremors. Just as they stopped eating and drinking suspiciously, the ground beneath them suddenly split apart. Pillars of dust rolled up and quickly engulfed their bodies. Enemy attack. The ogres instantly understood the situation and threw away the food in their hands. They jumped up and bent down to reach for their weapons. Now, what surprised them was that all of them had touched empty air. The first wave of scorpions that crawled out of the ground and launched a surprise attack wasn't the ogres, but the crude weapons that the ogres leaned against the tree beside them. The 3 scorpions used their large pincers to clamp down on the thick wooden and stone rods before burrowing into the ground. While the ogres were frantically searching for weapons, the second batch of 3 young centurion scorpions scuttled out of the ground, their razor-sharp pincers piercing into the ogre's thick calves. The ogre that was suddenly ambushed lost his weapon and could only use his fist, which was as thick as a clay pot, to desperately smash against the young thorn scorpion's carapace. The ogre's 7-point strength crushed the thick earth element surrounding the scorpion's body and pummeled it until its blood splattered everywhere. However, the thorns on the scorpion's carapace also stabbed the ogre's fists until they bled profusely. The pincers that bit into the ogre's calves continuously injected earth element energy into the scorpion's body. Under the control of the scorpions, the thorns pierced into the ogre's body one after another. Although most of the thorns were blocked by the ogre's tough skin, some still pierced into the ogre's body, inflicting horrifying injuries. In terms of individual strength, the ogre warrior was far stronger than the scorpions. In a one-on-one fight, the scorpions were definitely not a match for the ogre warrior. However, the ogre warrior was just an ordinary magical creature, while the scorpions were a true magical creature. Two young scorpions simultaneously tangled with an ogre warrior. Even though the battle was intense and chaotic, when both sides were riddled with injuries, the seventh young scorpion that suddenly pounced out from underground was the straw that broke the camel's back. Half an hour later, the battlefield regained its peace. The three ogres were injected with excessive earth element by the scorpions and finally lost control of their bodies. They flipped over and fell, no longer able to resist. At that moment, a series of rustling noises suddenly sounded. The three ogres, who had lost their limbs and had lost the ability to resist, were horrified to find a terrifying black swarm of insects swarming over the ground. When the ogres wanted to scream in fear, the scorpions pierced their necks with their venomous stingers. Thus, the three ogres completely fainted. The swarm of insects swarmed over and lifted the three ogres and two wild boars. Under the escort of the 7 scorpions, they quickly disappeared into the forest. Giant Hammer Mountain. The ogres that had gone out to hunt returned to camp after the sky darkened. They brought back a large amount of prey. The big ones were bison lizards, the small ones were wild boars and hares, and so on and so forth. All the ogres gathered excitedly and started bonfires in the camp, using large stone pots to cook delicious meat. This was probably the only cooking skill that all the ogres in the world possessed. As the ogres were muscular and simple-minded, they did not realize that 6 of their companions had gone missing on the first night. Thus, on the second day, they went out for the same hunt. This time, they lost 9 of their companions. No matter how stupid the ogres were, they knew that something was amiss. There had been ogres who had gone out to hunt, but because they had gone too far, it took them 2 to 3 days before they could return. But that was a rare exception. And now, in one breath, there were 9 ogre warriors that did not return to camp. No matter how one looked at it, this was a sneak attack on them. Unfortunately, as the number of missing ogre warriors far exceeded the number of fingers and toes of the ogre leaders, the ogre leader could not keep track of the number. Thus, when he reported to the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack, he used the word many to describe it. Regarding the frequent disappearance of the warriors under his command, Zack was also infuriated and exceptionally furious. As he roared in anger, a few ogre leaders came up with a plan, all of them targeting the Abebe Bee people. As the Abebe Bee people expanded wildly, their hunting territories overlapped with the ogres' hunting areas. Both sides had many conflicts in the overlapping areas, and they had fought several times. Thus, when the ogres encountered this unknown attack, their first thought was that the Abebe Bee people were behind it. With the encouragement of the leaders, the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack went berserk. When the sun rose on the second day, a large group of ogres led by Zack rushed down the Giant Hammer Mountain, killing their way into the Abebe Bee people's territory. In a dark and damp underground cave, more than a dozen bug nests made of a mixture of blood, wood chips, and mud stood tall in the middle of the cave, covered in fist-sized holes. Through the holes, one could clearly see that the insect nests were filled with squirming scorpion larvae and piles of bloody corpses. Blitz, who had regained his human form, stood in the middle of the insect nests, sizing up the larvae that were about to become his subordinates. As the blood in the cave expanded, Blitz's body, which was hidden under his black robe, underwent subtle changes. His human skin had been replaced by a layer of pitch-black carapace, and his hands had become a pair of large chelicerae that flickered with a metallic luster. On his chest and abdomen, 3 pairs of sickle-shaped appendages curled together. What was even more shocking was Blitz's head. The incessant swelling of his head tore apart the skin on his face. His mouth, nose, and eyes were slanted to one side, revealing a dark, sinister, and terrifying face. Dark green compound eyes, sinister and horrifying lotus-shaped mouthparts, and 2 strange antennae that stood tall. It could be seen that Blitz was very determined and thorough in the evolution of the Bugman. There wasn't much of a human left on his body. With the deepening of his insecticide transformation, Blitz had already silently crossed the threshold of a high-ranking acolyte, using a month or 2 to catch up to the height that demonic worm in tech had spent 6 to 7 years to reach. Even high-ranking acolyte wasn't the end of his evolution. As the larvae in the insect nest devoured large amounts of blood and food, Blitz's aura rose along with it. When the larvae in the 12 insect nests had successfully matured into young scorpions, they didn't choose to break out of their nests. Instead, they fought each other in close proximity. To Blitz, the young scorpions were still too weak and weren't suitable to be part of the insect army that followed him into battle. Hence, after completely sweeping through the surrounding magic creature nests, Blitz set the end point of the insect swarm's evolution as mature scorpions. Under his crazed and excited gaze, the 12 nests started a bloody and cruel process of devouring and evolving. Every young scorpion had their own consciousness and instincts. Of course, they didn't want their budding consciousness to become the cornerstone of someone else's evolution. Hence, the slaughter in every nest was extremely cruel and bloody, even to the point of insanity. Under Blitz's strict orders, only the strongest surviving larvae in each nest had the chance to grow and evolve. Hence, they crazily used every weapon on their bodies to attack every living being around them. This evolutionary battle that took place in a remote corner took a full 2 hours before it slowly ended. As the insect nest collapsed, 12 bloodied adult scorpions with incomplete carapaces crawled out of the mounds and gathered around Blitz. Chapter 475. While the dark forest was once again experiencing a small uproar, Grimm was busy in his laboratory. Every time he finished tempering his mind, Grimm's mental space would slightly collapse. During this period of time, he would have to gorge himself to consume large amounts of energy in order to support his body and mind's rapid recovery. He could not help but be thankful for this. As he was in the dark forest, he would never have to worry about a lack of magical beasts. It was said that there was a saying among combat magi: only the magus who could eat the most could become the magus who could fight the best. From this saying, one could basically understand the attitude of magi towards eating and drinking. This was not because magi were gluttons who indulged in eating and drinking, but because of the fragility of the human body. Be it elemental magi or body-tempering magi, the human body was not a help to magi. Instead, it was a huge restriction. The higher the level of a magus, the more terrifying the torrent of elemental energy that the body had to endure when casting high-level spells. If Grimm did not transform his body into an elemental body in time after becoming a fire magus, then every time he cast a powerful fire element spell, it would cause substantial damage to his body. One could imagine the terrifying lava flowing through his blood vessels at a temperature of a few thousand degrees. If one did not have a strong body, their blood vessels and flesh would have been burnt to ashes before they could even activate these high-rank spells. After the elemental transformation, the body would require even more energy to support it. The energy that an ordinary person's daily diet would not even be enough to support a magus casting the most insignificant of spells. That was why magi, as a high-energy life form, had to rely on a different diet to support the normal activities of their bodies. The so-called delicacies of human society, for magi, apart from having a taste, were not beneficial to their bodies at all. If magi wanted to grow stronger day by day, the magical energy meals made from the flesh of magical beasts would become a daily supplement for them. As it was adjacent to the dark forest, The blazing flame monarch naturally had a huge advantage in terms of magical beast resources. In the mission hall on the first floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, there were long-term missions to purchase the flesh of magical beasts hanging at the top of the mission board. In the rearing room of the Wizard's Pagoda, there were also some ordinary magical beasts with delicious meat. However, the flesh of these magical beasts was only available to the higher-ups of the Wizard's Pagoda, so the low-level magi apprentices had no chance of tasting it. As the blazing flame monarch's power increased, the number of magi apprentices within the Wizard's Pagoda increased. Apart from studying, experimenting, and practicing spells, their daily activities were also becoming more and more common. Magus, 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 Magi, Mag, Magoff, Magus had Magus. Mag, the Magus, Mag, Magus of Magus. Magus of the name was Magus of Mag to say, of Yang, Magus of Mags, the Mag Magoff of Tutu, and Dragon Mags Magus to the Magus. Perhaps no one could explain the bloodline relationship between them and the true fire dragon, but the trace of fire dragon's bloodline that permeated their bloodline was real. Because the earth fire dragons lived in the depths of volcanoes all year round, they loved to consume sulfur and fire energy cores, so their flesh was soaked in a thick fire elemental aura. Back then, in the elite apprentice camp in the Dark Crypt, Grimm had only eaten a single Hellfire Dragon rib, and his strength had skyrocketed. Now that he had become a wizard, the flesh of these magical creatures could no longer give him as much power as before. However, the Fire Dragon's ribs had a considerable effect on Grimm's body as he persistently swallowed them. If eating and drinking leisurely every day could allow one's body and spirit to grow by quite a bit, perhaps no magus would be able to resist such a blatant temptation. An adult Earth Fire Dragon weighed 3,000 kilograms. After removing the unnecessary parts and organs, the total amount of ribs left was about 2,000 kilograms. After the AI chip had fully calculated the energy content of the Fire Dragon's ribs and Grimm's fire elemental power growth requirements, it had set a daily quota of 50 kilograms for Grimm. 50 kilograms of ribs. If Grimm was a regular human, he would not be able to eat such a terrifying amount, even if he stuffed himself to death. However, this was only a small matter to Grimm. Although Grimm still had the appearance and breathing of a normal human, if he was thrown onto the operating table and dissected, he would find that all the internal organs and flesh tissues in his body were worlds apart from those of a human. This was something that could not be helped. Any human who became a magus would walk further and further down the path of mutation, until the day came when they could no longer turn back. Even people like Blitz had abandoned even the most basic of human thoughts. He left everyone in the dust on the path of insectoid transformation, swearing not to look back. Other than the Fire Dragon's ribs, Grimm had also tried the flesh of a ground fire lizard. Unfortunately, the sour and fishy smell was comparable to a potion concocted by a potioneering acolyte. After trying it once, Grimm had put it on the blacklist. Other than stuffing himself with food, what Grimm did most of the day was soaking in a medicinal bath. Grimm's spirit had stabilized at 8 points, which was almost the same as Wizard Kogan, who had advanced more than 100 years ago. They were both veteran magi. However, Grimm was lagging behind in all other aspects of his body. This had something to do with the fact that he had only advanced for a short period of time. He had been busy running around ever since he became a magus, so he did not have the time to settle down and solidify his foundation. If he did not have so many auxiliary methods, he would not have been able to achieve his current results. Grimm took advantage of this rare seclusion and began to train his body in all aspects. This so-called medicinal bath was actually a method used by low-ranked anatomy refinery sorcerers to strengthen their bodies. Using potions or poisons with rich energy, they could continuously stimulate the cells in the Magi's body, allowing them to achieve a dynamic balance between rapid death and recovery. This way, they could continuously stimulate their body's potential and fully tap into the power of their flesh. Of course, to use this method, They had to first solve the problem of their body weakening after training. This could be solved with the mana set meal. However, Grimm was training his spirit and wizard potions at the same time, so the weakening of both his body and spirit was tormenting him a lot of times. As a magus, even if he stayed in his room most of the time, he could still use his powerful spiritual sense to grasp everything that was happening in the wizard's pagoda. When needed, he could even control the changes around the Black Forest like an extension of his arm. However, at this moment, as his body and spirit had fallen to the bottom, he could not release his spiritual sense, and his body was extremely weak. This feeling of weakness made him feel like he had been beaten back to his original state. As the leader of a faction, he could not let his enemies or subordinates see this weak side of him, or else it could easily lead to unpredictable events. That was why Grimm had never left the 5th level of the wizard's pagoda. Even Gargamel, who was preparing the medicinal bath for him, had not seen him. Since his body and spirit were so weak that he could not see anyone, Grimm closed the door and began to study some of the research projects that he had put aside for a long time. Over the past 2 days, the research project that he had been following up on was the strange insect that had found out about the spider's lair. Unlike the mutated insect queen, this strange insect that was still alive had its own unique survival abilities. If the mutated insect queen was seeking to live and prosper together with its host, then this strange insect was purely stealing and plundering. This strange insect had been taken from the Medusa's body, and it had been placed there by the old spider himself, hoping that it would break out of the body and become a powerful support for him. The strength of this strange insect was that it could steal the natural instincts of its host and turn them into nourishment for its growth. Even though the natural instincts that it had stolen could not restore 100% of its host's abilities, Grimm was still shocked and moved. Since ancient times, a person's natural instincts were determined the moment they were born. Even though it was possible to optimize and improve them later on with a large number of rare resources, it was unimaginable to completely change one's natural instincts. After obtaining the strange insect, Grimm had flipped through many books and historical records, but he could not find any information on this insect. At least in the books and ancient books that Grimm had read, he had never heard of any similar examples. This showed how valuable this strange insect's ability to steal the natural instincts of other living beings was. Thus, from the moment he obtained this strange insect, Grimm had set up a laboratory for it, authorizing the AI chip to test and cultivate it in all aspects. After a series of tests, Grimm obtained a result that was both good and bad. On one hand, he was happy that this strange insect could steal the natural instincts of its host. On the other hand, he was worried that the natural instincts it stole were fragmented and could not be pieced back together through experiments. Just like how the old spider had parasitized the Medusa's body, even the old spider did not know what kind of abilities the insect would obtain when it broke out of the body. It was impossible to completely absorb the Medusa's innate ability to petrify, but there was a chance that a weakened version of the paralyzing gaze could be formed. No sorcerer could explain how this strange witchcraft ability appeared. Chapter 476. Innate Plunder Insect. According to the AI chip's experimental data, this insect could only plunder once in its life, which was the moment it evolved from a larva to an adult. However, this plunder had its limits. 17% of the gene fragments was the upper limit of this insect's innate ability. If this limit was exceeded, the excessive amount of foreign gene fragments would cause the insect's genes to become unstable, which would lead to the collapse of the gene chain. This obviously could not achieve Grimm's goal of obtaining 100% of the target's gene chain. The Magus world was powerful and prosperous. Even Grimm himself did not believe that no Magus had ever discovered this strange ability of this insect. However, the Magus world had not developed a complete microscopic system, which meant that even the most powerful Magus in this world could only extend their magic to the molecular level. Further down, when sorcery research reached the atomic level, the high-grade sorcerers became helpless. This was actually a kind of inevitability. In Grimm's previous life, Earth was a low-magic world and lacked the existence of extraordinary powers. This was why precise science had appeared. Even the most ordinary human could use microscopes and other auxiliary devices to examine the microscopic level of the molecular level. And in a high-magic society, no matter how difficult it was to cure a mortal's disease, it could be treated with a small dispel spell. If it did not work, a bottle of healing potion made from the water of life could be used to bring the dead back to life and rejuvenate. It was precisely because of the convenience and miraculousness of extraordinary powers that when magi encountered problems, they would use magic as the only way to solve them. This also caused the natural sciences, humanities, social sciences, and precise science in various material planes to lag behind. However, these were inevitably replaced by a certain system of magic. Organ transplants on Earth also existed in high magic worlds, but they were more convenient and violent. The magi participating in the surgery did not even need to be proficient in human organs or live dissection. They only needed a small spell called organ activation. Although the dissection of creatures was bloody and the operating table was no different from a slaughterhouse, the creatures in high magic worlds also had strong vitality that was 10 times stronger than those on Earth. No matter how crude the surgical conditions were or how crude the surgical process was, when the light of supernatural power shone on them, the dissected subjects were still full of vigor and violence when they climbed down the operating table. The artificial intelligence that Earth had could also be found in high magical worlds. That was the tower spirit of the top-notch wizard's pagoda. While the people of Earth were still worried about the betrayal of artificial intelligence, the wizards had already tamed the tower genie into the most loyal and reliable servant. Many sorcerers spent their entire lives in their own sorcerer tower. Some magi who were especially infatuated with their lovers would even fuse the souls of their lovers with the tower genie in order to stay with them for the rest of their lives. Stripping the soul and fusing the soul with matter was a technology that was difficult to reach even when Earth's technology was developed to an extremely high level. Therefore, in two different environments, similar material conditions gave birth to two completely different ways of civilization. The civilization of science and technology, and the civilization of witchcraft. Grimm was a witness to both civilizations. He was a true wizard, but the chip in his mind was the crystallization of a technological civilization. Thus, when he worked hard to fuse the two civilizations together, he had a life and soul that far exceeded that of an ordinary wizard. While other magi in his position indulged in all sorts of intrigue and power struggles, he could not help but want to lift the veil that covered his eyes and let himself see the truth of the world with his own eyes. It was precisely this condescending view of life that made him keenly aware of the power of these mystical insects. Of course, it was difficult for an ordinary wizard to reach this level of power. Only an individual like him, who was a part of both civilizations, could find a way to bypass the upper limit of gene absorption. Thus, over the past few days, Grimm had devoted most of his time and energy to researching the insects. Although he had not made any breakthroughs, the alternative plans that the chip had suggested had all been verified. Currently, Grimm was working hard to extract the mysterious substance from the bodies of the mysterious insects that could steal life's genes. This undoubtedly consumed a lot of time and energy. This was a biological laboratory that was filled with magical colors. The entire wall emitted a bright, soft, and colorless white light, illuminating the interior of the room. However, in the middle of the laboratory stood a dozen translucent cocoons. Beneath the cocoons was a thick layer of flesh that covered the floor of the biological laboratory like a carpet of fungi. Some of them even extended to the walls. The cocoons and the carpet of fungi were connected by a few thick flesh tubes. These tubes were attached to the surface of the translucent cocoons and grew like the blood vessels of a human heart. They constantly transported light yellow nutrients into the cocoons. Through the translucent cocoon membrane, one could vaguely see embryos of various shapes and sizes floating in the cocoons. From their size and shape, it could be determined that the embryos in the cocoons belonged to different stages of the same organism's asexual reproduction. In the middle of the large cocoon, the mysterious insect that Grimm had captured from Medusa's body was floating with its limbs spread out. Even its scorpion tail was hanging limply, as if it was in a deep state of anesthesia. As for the owner of this biological laboratory, Grimm was currently pacing back and forth between the cocoons, silently observing the evolution and development of each embryo. Due to the lack of the support of precise science, it was simply impossible for Grimm to build a biological laboratory that was similar to the one on Earth from scratch. Thus, Grimm borrowed the thinking of biological science on Earth and various methods of the sorcery civilization to create this magical biological laboratory. The nutrient fluid that supported the survival of the insects and embryos contained almost all the nutrients needed for evolution. It was a miraculous medicine that Grimm, the top pharmacist of the Blazing Flame Monarch, had meticulously concocted according to Grimm's instructions and requirements. Any embryo that was thrown into it would be able to evolve from a larva to an adult in the shortest time possible under the stimulation of the extremely concentrated life force potion. This process was still controllable. The concentration of the life force potion that was injected at every moment was under the control of Grimm, the owner of the laboratory. Due to the preciousness of the insects, Grimm had not been able to find a second one, even after carefully searching through the old spider's lair. Therefore, in order to avoid completely destroying such a precious experimental specimen due to his own mistakes, Grimm first needed to cultivate a large number of substitutes for the alien insect specimen before extracting the alien insect gene fragments. Although this particular insect was only a larva, Grimm was able to successfully extract its life force through the AI chip's deep scan. Therefore, the next step was to work hard to cultivate Alien Insect 2, Alien Insect 3, Alien Insect 4. Since the specimen was not the only one, he could put some deep work into slicing it and isolating its genes. Grimm quickly arrived in front of a cocoon bubble. Within the light yellow nutrient fluid was an irregular piece of flesh the size of a palm. More than 10 long tentacles hung by the side of the piece of flesh and waved about, allowing it to swim around freely like a fish. Although there were no eyes, ears, nose, or any other organs on its body, and there was no hidden system of life within the piece of flesh either. However, when Grimm's gaze passed through the cocoon and landed on the piece of flesh, it actually stopped moving like a startled little beast and sank to the bottom of the bubble. Playing dead. This seems to be a survival ability that only mid-level intelligent beings can master. Could it be that this unremarkable piece of flesh already has the intelligence required for a mid-level life form? Grimm grinned and sighed silently. The mysteries of the sorcerer world's life system were indeed beyond his imagination. Any past knowledge and rules would only serve as a shackle for future research. If he wanted to progress in this new system of mysticism, the most important thing was to get rid of the interference of the fixed thoughts in his mind. Grimm silently drew a rune in the air and inserted it into the blanket of fungi below him. The flesh tube coiled around the cocoon membrane trembled slightly, and a concentrated life force potion was injected into the bubble. Grimm laid on top of the cocoon membrane and stared unblinkingly at the reaction of the flesh. The flesh that was still playing dead began to tremble violently under the stimulation of the powerful life force potion. More than 10 tentacles retracted back into the body, and the piece of flesh began to swell and change shape. Under Grimm's almost penetrating AI, chip scan, and spiritual sense, the piece of flesh continuously absorbed the nutrients into its body and quickly transformed into the corresponding flesh tissues and internal organs. Some muscles and bones appeared out of nowhere and gradually developed. Then, the muscle fibers attached to them stretched them to the appropriate position, forming the initial frame of the alien insect in the future. This process was mystical and mysterious. It had the rigor of a life science, but it also had the uncanny workmanship of a mysterious force. Grimm was secretly amazed as he watched. However, the moment the alien insect skeleton had just been constructed, a mysterious genetic shock suddenly destroyed everything. The sound of the chain breaking occurred at the genetic level, and the alien insect that was halfway through its evolution exploded into a bloody paste. This time, the explosion was so uniform that not even a single grain of meat was left in the cocoon, turning it into minced flesh and blood, evenly painting the cocoon membrane a glaring blood-red color. Grimm straightened his back in disappointment. The AI chip's prompt sounded in his mind. Chapter 477. The entire northern region was the territory of the witches. The once powerful 13 witch factions divided the entire northern region into 13 tightly connected territories, and in the center was a vast neutral territory with an area of hundreds of miles. The seat of the witch council, Vilning. To be honest, Vilning was a huge city with a population of nearly 300,000. The most well-known place in the city was the council hall, located in the center of the city, a sacred place for the witch leaders to gather and discuss. Since each witch faction had its own territory and dominated all external affairs in the territory, the witch leaders would not waste their precious time to go to this remote place and quarrel endlessly at the conference table. Therefore, unless it was a major event that involved multiple witch factions, the witch leaders would not waste their precious time running to this remote place to quarrel endlessly at the conference table. In order to maintain their justice and fairness, the Cecilia family vowed to protect Vilning for life and would never reveal their family's strength in Vilning. Due to the constraints of this ancient oath, the iron mask flag of the Cecilia family was always fluttering in the sky above Vilning, never changing, even though there were only 7 witch factions left in the past, and the surrounding factions' territories had changed many times. Due to the constraints of this ancient oath, even though there were only 7 witch factions left from the original 13 factions, and the surrounding factions' territories had changed many times, the iron mask flag of the Cecilia family had always been flying in the sky above Vilning and had never changed. It was a peaceful and leisurely afternoon. While Ulthar and 5 witch apprentices were patrolling the sky around Vilning on their flying brooms, they suddenly saw a black spot in the distant sky. Someone has come to Vilning? Ulthar frowned, pushed the flying broom under her with her hand, turned around, and flew towards the black spot with the other witches. When they were about 200 meters away, Ulthar, the leader of the patrol team, could not help but frown. There were a total of 3 people riding a magic carpet, which was also the most common means of transportation used by the northern witches during group activities. There were 3 people on the magic carpet. Kneeling at the very front and carefully controlling the magic carpet was a witch apprentice. Judging from her appearance and figure, she seemed to be only 8 or 9 years old. The apprentice robe she was wearing was strange, and the badge on her chest seemed to be engraved with a scale symbol. This was the first time Ulthar had seen such a badge in the past 100 years. Behind the witch apprentice, there were 2 unfamiliar real witches sitting cross-legged. The one in the lead was dressed in an exquisite purple starry robe. His silky silver hair was draped over his shoulders, and his face was unusually gentle and tranquil. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes had a pair of deep blue eyes that left a deep impression. As they flickered, they gave off a bewitching and mysterious feeling. As for the last witch, she seemed a little strange. She was so sturdy that she didn't look like a woman anymore. She wore a pirate's eye patch and green leather armor. In her hand was a thick wooden staff that looked heavy. The witches of Ulthar repeatedly looked at the newcomers, but they could not match them with the witches they knew in their minds. Finally, she couldn't help but speak. "I'm sorry, but Vilning City is just ahead. If you want to visit this place, please return to the surface and follow the rules. Otherwise, according to the rules passed down from ancient times, ordinary witches were not allowed to fly within 30 miles of Vilning City, and they had to be under the supervision of the witches of the Cecilia family. Only the witch leaders and the witches of the Cecilia family, who were the guardians, were exceptions. However, As the Witch Council had gradually become a decoration over the years, these rules had been somewhat relaxed. If it were thousands of years ago, if ordinary witches dared to intrude into the surroundings of Wilning City, the witches of the Seticilia family would have already detained them. They wouldn't have been so polite to dissuade them. As far as I know, some witches have the right to fly directly into the hall of the council. The beautiful witch in the purple robe suddenly spoke. Her voice was low and sweet, but there was a hint of power that could not be disobeyed. Of course, the Witch Council has such a rule. A contemptuous smile appeared on the face of the Ulthar witches. But that rule only applies to the witch leaders of each faction. Ordinary witches can. Before she finished speaking, the voice of the Ulthar witches suddenly stopped because she saw a mysterious card emitting colorful, dazzling light in the hand of the beautiful witch. Card of Fate. The Ulthar witches could become the captain of the inspection team, so they were obviously more knowledgeable than ordinary people. Sensing the mysterious power in the card, she could not help but say, You are the Witch of Fate, Alice? Although the Seticilia family guarded Wilning City and never interfered with the private conflicts of the witch factions, they had heard a little about the reopening of the Tower of Fate and the reappearance of the Witch of Fate. During the Battle of Fate, the Seticilia family had also sent 1 or 2 representatives to attend the ceremony. After they came back, they described the new Witch of Fate, Alice, as a mysterious and unpredictable person. I am the leader of the Witch of Fate, Alice. I need to go to the hall of the council now. Why, are you still planning to stop me? Alice stared coldly at the witch of the Seticilia family. I dare not. Ulthar is willing to lead the way for you. Although the one standing in front of Ulthar was only a grade 1, which, the halo above her head, was not something she could easily offend. Therefore, in the face of the powerful Witch of Fate, Alice, the Ulthar witches could only give way and accompany them to Wilning City. 2 hours later, the melodious bell of the Witch Council Hall resounded throughout the city. Hearing the bell, many residents of Wilning City walked out of their houses and gathered on the streets, looking at the hall from afar. For most of them, the bell was quite unfamiliar, and they were at a loss. However, to some of the old men, the sound of the bell had awakened a distant memory that had been buried deep within their memories. This bell, I know, this is the bell of the witch leaders to convene the meeting. I remember. When I was young, my white-haired grandfather once described this kind of bell to me. Hearing the old man's excited shout, the listeners could not help but be stunned. Most of them had lived in Wilning City all their lives, but this was the first time they had heard such a bell. Could it be that the long-sealed Witch Council was going to convene again? Witch Council? Are all the witch leaders going to come when they hear this bell? Someone asked in confusion. They will definitely come. As long as they are still northern witches, they will definitely come when they hear this bell. Amidst the discussion, the old man's weak shout sounded a little hoarse. As the former center of power in the north, Wilning City had been silent for too long. Now that they suddenly heard the bell that had been ringing for 100 years, an unconcealable torrent surged in the hearts of all the city residents, and their faces were filled with excitement and joy. Bursts of cheers and dancing, turning Wilning City into a sea of joy in an instant. Just as the city residents spontaneously celebrated, countless apprentice witches wearing the badges of the Seticilia family mounted their flying brooms and rushed out of Wilning City, flying towards the territories of other witch factions. Alice, who had just ascended to the position of the Destiny Witches for less than a year, actually used the leader's authority to send a proposal to all the witch factions to convene a witch council. For a moment, a stone stirred up 1,000 ripples, and the entire north became restless. Everyone was talking about it, not knowing what the new leader of the Destiny Witches was going to do. And all the witch factions were even more puzzled, not knowing how to deal with this troublemaker who did not play by the rules. According to the tradition left behind by the ancient witches, only the witch leader could make a motion to convene a witch council and then deal with some internal problems of the witches by gathering votes. However, with the passage of time, all the witch factions devoted their energy to the expansion and development of their own territories, and the Witch Council, which used to be the highest authority of the northern witches, became less and less important. Even if there were occasional disputes between the factions, several faction leaders would gather together to discuss and solve them, and rarely used the Witch Council, which was a big killing machine. Therefore, imperceptibly, the Witch Council gradually became a mere figurehead and became a rubber stamp for the existing major witch factions to take turns to manage some neutral public cities. However, the reputation of the Witch Council would only be covered in dust, but would not be erased. Therefore, when the bell in Wilming City's Parliament Hall rang once more, the entire northern lands were turned upside down. Although they were not optimistic about Witch Alice, and although they did not want the Witch Council to be above them again, when the bell rang, all the witch leaders could only put down the matters at hand with a dark face and rush thousands of miles away to the familiar yet strange place, Wilming City. For a time, the surrounding area of Wilming City was in turmoil again, and every day, a large number of witches would come tirelessly. On the third day after the bell rang, even the leader of the Pale Witch, who was the furthest away from here, appeared in the council hall. At this point, all the witch leaders in the entire north had gathered in Wilming City. After 132 years, a new witch council was convened. The so-called council hall was actually just an ancient fortress-style castle, and the place where the witch leaders held the council, in the end, was just a dim side hall on the second floor of the castle. On the wall of the side hall, there were 3 long, narrow windows. Because it was difficult for sunlight to penetrate, even during the day, torches were needed to light up every corner. In the side hall, an extremely ordinary long table was placed in the middle, and along the table were 14 wooden, crude, high-back chairs. Other than a black, high-back chair placed at one end of the long table, the other 13 chairs were placed on both sides of the long table. Each of the high-back chairs was etched with the corresponding witch emblem. However, at this moment, only 8 of the 13 high-back chairs were sitting, and the remaining 5 chairs were still empty. As for the black, high-back chair at the head of the table, no one dared to approach it. According to legend, the black, high-back chair was the seat of the Witch King. Here, no one dared to offend the dignity of the Witch King. Chapter 478. Meryl, what are you trying to do? The first to speak up was the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe. It was no wonder that she was furious. This was the critical moment when the Dark Tower was experiencing the impact of the Shadow Tide. Every year, when a Shadow Tide broke out, Circe, as the leader of the Dark Witches, had to stay in the Dark Tower to prevent any accidents from happening to the land of origin. But now, as the council hall's bell rang, she could only abide by the ancient contract and come to this old, rotten, and gloomy hall to listen to this ignorant little girl tell her story. A little girl who was only a grade 1 was delusional enough to have the right to sit on equal footing with them. Like Circe, she was not the only leader of the witches who was filled with anger. The leader of the Witches of Pain had even been summoned back by her people from the front line of the war in another plane. When she thought of the tense stalemate in the other plane and the fact that she had spent 3 days and nights running back to Wilming City, the leader of the Witches of Pain's delicate and beautiful face was filled with an unconcealable murderous intent. In the vast council hall, there were 6 grade 4 witches and 1 grade 3 witch. When they all stared at Alice, who was sitting alone in her chair, the mental pressure that assaulted her was enough to make any grade 1 witch lose their courage. Alice sat there with a pale face. She bit her lower lip and used all her strength to stop her body from trembling. In the face of a room full of high-grade witches, a grade 1, which like her was not worth mentioning at all. If not for the ancient contract that gave her the right to be the leader of the witches, she would not even have the right to listen in, let alone sit here and discuss important matters with these witch leaders. Alice's azure blue eyes swept across everyone. The energy fields and spiritual undulations on the surface of their bodies stimulated her so much that she couldn't stop crying. Everyone in the room was no less than a small sun in Alice's eyes. The magic glow around them was so strong that Alice would be blinded if she looked at them for more than 3 seconds. In this case, even if Alice opened her eyes as wide as she could, it was still difficult for her to see the other party's face through the strong protective fluorescence. Alice was even worried that if the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe, really roared, just the sound waves alone would be enough to kill a mere grade 1 witch like her. Fortunately, although these chief witches were all furious, they still knew to restrain their witchcraft power and mental fluctuations, lest they accidentally hurt this chief witch. Alice's strength might not be worth mentioning, but her identity was protected by the ancient contract. The Northern Witches had never publicly killed each other. At least the senior witches at the leader level knew how to maintain the interests of the whole. Alice, we're all waiting for your answer. Among the witch leaders, only the Witch of Death, Thuna, remained calm. However, her words still made Alice's heart palpitate. Although convening a meeting of the witches is the right that every witch leader has, but the witches who call for the meeting must put forward a proposal of sufficient weight. Otherwise, we, the leaders of the witches, can vote to abolish your authority as the leader of the Fate Witches. Alice sat in the chair in silence for a long time. When her mood calmed down and she began to gradually adapt to the mental coercion of the many senior witches, she finally opened her mouth to speak. Leaders, I've gathered everyone here this time in order to make the witches of the entire northern region strong again. Alice's words were intermittent. We didn't come here to listen to your empty words. Strong? How to be strong? How to be strong? You better say something more practical. The leader of the Dark Witches, Circe, snorted coldly. A large plane that has just ascended for less than 1,000 years. Is it not enough to make the Northern Witches strong again? Under the pressure of so many mental coercion, Alice had to repeatedly adjust her breath to make her words more fluent. A large plane? A large plane? Each of the chief witches could not help but be inexplicably surprised. For the first time, they began to show a trace of interest in Alice's proposal. Say it clearly. What does this large plane have to do with us Northern Witches? This time, it was still the Witch of Death, Thuna, who spoke. After saying that, this level 4 Witch of Death, Thuna, waved her hand at Alice and blessed her with an undead protection. In this way, Alice could be spared the pain of dealing with the mental coercion of the senior witches. Thank you, Sister Thuna. Alice's face finally showed a trace of blood, and she nodded and smiled at the other party. This time, I specifically called everyone here for the re-emergence of us Northern Witches. In order to achieve this goal, I'm going to contribute the coordinates of a large plane that has just ascended for less than 1,000 years and call on all of our sisters to kill our way into it. If we Northern Witches rely on our own strength to take down that plane, would we still have to worry about becoming strong again? All the witch leaders were aghast. The value of a large plane was something that even the people present would find difficult to fully estimate. In the current sorcerer world, the coordinates of a small plane world were worth millions of magic crystals. This was not even a plane that had already been conquered, but a complete plane world. Just the coordinates of a plane world were worth millions of magic crystals. Similarly, the coordinates of a medium-sized plane world were 100 times more valuable than a small plane world. As for a large plane, its value could only be answered with the word immeasurable. One had to know that even the current sorcerer world was only a large plane. However, the sorcerer world had been a large plane for tens of thousands of years, and its strength in all aspects had been developed to the extreme. Only then did it have the opportunity to become a plane overlord with tyrannical strength in the multiverse. If everything that Alice said was true, and the large plane she contributed was really a plane world that had ascended not long ago, then there would not be many level 4 powerhouses in the plane. In this way, it might not be possible to completely swallow it with the strength of all the Northern Witches, but it was still possible to occupy a certain amount of territory and then take the opportunity to plunder the plane's resources. However, how could Alice be willing to contribute such a precious resource like the coordinates of a large plane? If the same situation had happened to any of the witch leaders in the field, they would have made a fortune in silence. They would have led their own families to stir up trouble and would not have contributed anything to share with others. One had to know that once the world coordinates of a large plane were shared, everyone would work together to open the door to a new world. No one could say for sure who would gain more and who would gain less. Perhaps one's luck was too bad, and they would be surrounded by the plane's natives as soon as they entered. At that time, not to mention plundering resources, even the troops that they brought in might be lost. In this respect, Alice did not necessarily have any advantage over the others. The more they thought about it, the more incredulous they felt. However, looking at Alice's current strength, they vaguely had an answer. That was a large plane, even if it was as Alice said, and it had only ascended from a medium-sized plane not long ago. Its basic strength was still there. No matter how weak the other party was, it was not something that a group of Tier 1 witches could manipulate at will. If a Tier 1 witch like Alice broke in, the most likely outcome was that she would be easily killed by the enemy like a bedbug, with no room for resistance. As for holding the coordinates of a large plane in her hands and waiting for her strength to increase before looking for opportunities, this idea was even more childish to the point of making people laugh. By the time Alice grew her fangs, the other party would have already grown into a behemoth. At that time, the gap in strength between the two would not be narrowing, but widening at a faster speed. So from this point of view, it was not so unreasonable for Alice to contribute something that she could not covet in pursuit of more substantial benefits. After thinking about this, the expressions of the many witch leaders could not help but relax. For the first time, they felt that this little girl Alice was quite good. Even the leader of the Witches of Pain, who had been wearing a cold face, could not help but feel a little better. Alice, if what you've just said is true, then I'll tell you. Then how are you going to prove it? Don't tell me you want to hand over the coordinates of that world now. The leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, was the first to raise her question. I hope that you can choose 2 representatives to go to the Tower of Destiny. I will hand over the world coordinates there. At that time, you can take the opportunity to test the authenticity of this world coordinates. But before everyone prepares for the invasion, I still hope that the world coordinates will be kept in my hands. Look, this plan. Alice immediately threw out the idea that she had already thought about. The witch leaders looked at each other and thought for a while, but did not find anything wrong with it. That's good. Thuna nodded. Then, sisters, let's vote to decide who will be responsible for testing the world coordinates. There is no doubt that such a candidate could only be chosen from the 6 Tier 4 witches, so the Tier 3 Winter Witch leader, Morgana, was automatically excluded. Although the 6 Tier 4 witches were of the same rank, there were always some of them who were highly respected, so it did not take much effort for everyone to elect the Witch of Death, Thuna, and the Dark Witch Circe. Originally, the Pale Witch, Sylvia, was also a good candidate, but before Alice became a Witch of Destiny, she was a member of the Moya family under the Pale Witch. So in order to avoid the possibility of collusion between them, the leaders still chose Circe, who was at odds with Alice, to be the judge. However, just as everyone reached an agreement and became satisfied with each other, the Dark Witch, Circe, suddenly trembled, and a black mist spread around her. Alice, how dare you? You actually dare to send people into the secret realm of darkness to kidnap people. You're courting death. Chapter 479. The dense light from the teleportation slowly dissipated in the teleportation room. 6 hazy figures gradually materialized, appearing in front of Grim bit by bit. Welcome, Lord Ender. It was obvious that Grim was hesitant about how to address Mary. Therefore, when he straightened his body, he met Mary's teasing red eyes. 6 people had arrived at the Blazing Flame Monarch through the teleportation formation. Poison Centipede Ender, Blood-Sucking Mary, her 3 Blood Knights, and that old fox Winlear. Though they seemed normal on the surface, Grim could tell from countless minute details that Mary and Ender had severe injuries on their bodies. This was especially so for poison centipede Ender. After being imprisoned for a long time in a dark illusion, her body had been seriously contaminated by shadow matter. It seemed that without a period of recuperation and treatment, it would be difficult for her to return to her peak strength. Kid, looks like this old hag will have to stay here for a while. Although Ender's origin was injured, he was in an unprecedentedly good mood. He could not help but smile at Grim, and a trace of benevolence appeared on his ugly and gloomy face. Welcome, welcome. You're warmly welcomed. Treat this place as your own home. I've already arranged everything. It was just a few short sentences, but Grim's forehead was covered in sweat. Sorcerers were fickle and selfish to begin with. They prioritized their own interests over everything else. Now that a relative, Ender, had suddenly appeared, even Grim, who had always been calm, found it difficult to keep his composure. All right, then I'll go and rest. It was obvious that poison centipede Ender had used up quite a bit of her spirit in order to survive this long-distance teleportation. Now that she was in a safe place, her spirit could not take it anymore. Gargamel, bring Lord Ender to her residence. Gargamel, who had been waiting at the side, immediately led the poison woman away with a fawning smile. When only Mary and her subordinates were left, Grim regained his composure. Seeing Mary in blood-red armor, he could not help but reveal a sincere smile. Why? Don't you want to know how Alice is doing now? Mary's tight, blood-red leather armor showed off her beautiful figure. She raised her eyebrows, and a playful smile appeared on her delicate face again. Don't worry. Before we leave, that Alice will still be in good condition. She seems to have reached an agreement with those witches, so as long as the dark witches don't have any direct evidence, they won't be able to touch her. I'm not worried about her. I'm worried about you. Grim smiled as he took a step forward. It's not that easy to break through the dark illusion. I can see that your internal injuries are not light either. How about I help you take a look? Mary's body stiffened. She rolled her eyes at Grim and waved her hand without looking back. Lord Grim, and I still have some matters to attend to. You guys can take a stroll around the tower. Remember, don't cause trouble for me. Yes. The three Blood Knights bowed at the same time. Soros and Venlier quickly glanced at Grim, then walked out of the teleportation room without saying a word. Let's go. Didn't you say that you're going to protect my body? Mary smiled charmingly. Let me take a look at you. Why did your mind suddenly become so weak? 6 hours later, after an intense brawl, the satisfied couple finally stopped. Their bodies intertwined, and they hugged each other as they lay on the bed, beginning their real conversation. In fact, Mary only knew a little about Alice's plan. She only knew that Alice had to go to the Witch Council to lure away the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe. She then used her status as the leader of the Dark Witches to call for a meeting. This method was obviously very effective, and she really managed to lure Circe away from the Dark Illusion realm. Taking advantage of the absence of Circe, the master of the Wizard's Pagoda, and the time when the Dark Shadow Tide was about to attack, Mary broke into the Wizard's Pagoda, killed her way into the cells at the bottom, and successfully took away the poison centipede, Ender. The whole process was described by Mary herself. Even though he knew that she had succeeded, Grim was still shaken to his core. He could sense something else from the simple description. Foresight. Foresight. First of all, before the Dark Illusion realm faced the Dark Shadow Tide, the Dark Witches would clean up the Shadow Valley a dozen days in advance, then temporarily cut off the connection between the Origin Wizard's Pagoda and the Sorcerer's World. This also prevented the possibility of an enemy infiltrating the Origin Wizard's Pagoda from the Sorcerer's World, and allowed them to focus on dealing with the Shadow World's challenges. Alice had obviously predicted this situation, so she ordered Mary to infiltrate the Shadow Valley a month in advance, and successfully evade the search of the Dark Witches. So when the Level 4 Wizard Circe was not around, and the main forces of the Dark Witches were deployed to the Shadow World, Mary, who was hiding in the Shadow Valley, immediately killed her way through the weakest link of the Origin Wizard's Pagoda and managed to break into the underground cells. Under normal circumstances, rushing into the cell was already the limit of Mary's power. It was simply impossible for her to take someone away from there. After all, the connection between the sorcerer's world and the Shadow Valley had been temporarily cut off, and any ordinary teleportation spell would not be able to escape. But it was still no match for Alice's magical methods. Alice had given Mary a round silver stone before they set off. When Mary found Ender, she did not have to force her way out. She only had to take out the silver stone and chant the necessary activation incantation. Then the silver stone would successfully bring them back to the Tower of Destiny. Of course, Mary didn't know what the mysterious silver stone was, but Grimm couldn't help but smile when he heard it. Throughout the entire rescue process, Alice had completely displayed the powerful ability of foresight. Every move of the enemy, and even every arrangement, had been completely grasped by her. She could also make full use of all the resources and opportunities around her, paving a path to victory for herself. The power of the talent of destiny could be seen in this. Of course, the strength of the favorite of destiny was never their own strength, but their deep understanding of the laws of the world, as well as the extreme use of the resources at hand. Without an obedient Mary, no matter how good Alice's plan was, it would be difficult for it to completely go according to her expectations. It was like two boxers engaged in a life-and-death fight, and one of the boxers had the ability to foresee the landing point and posture of the next 3 punches of the other boxer. So when the boxer threw the first punch, he dodged and counterattacked at the right time. Then, at this moment, there was a small turning point in destiny. When the foresight of destiny changed the result of the first punch, would the opponent still stubbornly throw the second and third punch according to the predetermined trajectory of destiny? No, at this moment, under the influence of the ripples of destiny, it was no longer destiny that controlled the development of the world, but the established laws hidden behind the world. Only when the ripples of destiny dissipated would this small world once again enter the orbit of destiny, surging forward majestically. It was out of reverence for the power of destiny that Grimm cared so much about Alice's identity as a witch of destiny. And now, Alice had indeed displayed her aptitude and ability as a witch of destiny. More importantly, their relationship was very harmonious. This could be seen from Alice's plan. Poison Woman Ender could be considered Alice's only relative in this world. For her, Alice was even willing to face one or more grade 4 witches head-on. Now that she had sent Poison Woman to the blazing flame monarch and into Grimm's hands, it was obvious that she did not care that Grimm would use this to threaten her. This was what Grimm was most gratified about. Although Grimm had understood most of Alice's plan, he still couldn't figure out how she had subdued Mary. Grimm simply knew Mary too well. In order to fight for the position of the leader of the faction, she had even fought with him. Moreover, Grimm believed that even if Mary really obtained the title of the victor, she would only push everything to Grimm and use the title of the leader of the faction to satisfy her deep-rooted mentality of being a powerhouse. Therefore, to Mary, ordinary preaching and enticement of benefits were ineffective. The only way to win her respect was to fight. Only by displaying the strength of a powerhouse would she be able to smoothly find her own position in their relationship. Otherwise, Mary would forever hover between obedience and disobedience, constantly worrying. Hence, Grimm was very curious about how Alice had subdued Mary. After a round of coaxing and pestering, Grimm finally found out about the behind-the-scenes deal between the two women. Bloodline shackles. After hearing Alice's method, Grimm slapped his thigh hatefully. Damn it, why didn't I think of this? However, he also knew that even if he had thought of this method, so what? With Alice's methods, would he be able to successfully find that vampire? As the saying went, if you have the strength, you can't use your brain. He did not have such a method, so he could only rely on brute force to defeat Mary. On the other hand, Alice could easily subdue her with just a few words. Perhaps this was how the witches of destiny did things. However, Grimm did not know that while he was fooling around with Mary, in the distant Tower of Destiny, Alice was silently weeping as she faced the sky full of stars. When the beautiful starlight shone down, it illuminated her exquisite and beautiful face, as well as her silky long hair that was half silver and half white. Unknowingly, half of her hair had already turned white. For the fastest novel reading, please visit Chapter 480. The battle was still going on under the night sky. Both sides were fighting with all their might. Although they had suffered heavy casualties, they still did not retreat. Overall, the Abbé Beemen still had the upper hand on the battlefield. The Beemen warriors were attacking in small groups, using their poisoned arrows to attack the lone ogres. The ogre warriors, on the other hand, were not afraid of the scattered poisoned arrows at all. Instead, they roared and grabbed rocks the size of a human head and threw them at the Abbé Beemen. In the forest, poisonous arrows and stones collided with one another, and Beemen warriors were smashed into the treetops one after another. With the help of Wizard Zack's bloodlust spell, the ogres with hardened skin began to glow with a blood-red light. They waved their clubs and withstood the concentrated poison arrows, attacking the defense line formed by the Beemen warriors. The difference in individual strength between both sides was too big. 2 or 3 Beemen warriors were no match for the ogres. If the Abbé Beemen did not have the absolute advantage in numbers, the two-headed ogre Wizard Zack would have already charged into the beehive with more than 40 ogres. These wild ogres were more than 3 meters tall, and their bodies were as sturdy as barbarians. They did not wear any armor. Other than a simple animal skin around their waist, they did not have any protective gear. Every time Wizard Zack let out an angry roar from behind, these ogres would yell and wave their thick wooden clubs towards the Beemen's defense line. Facing the concentrated poisonous arrows of the Beemen, they did not dodge. Instead, they used their thick left arms to cover their heads, which were vulnerable to attack, and waved their simple weapons as they rushed forward. When the poisonous arrows hit their bodies, most of them were blown away by their hard skin. Only a few could penetrate their skin and hang on. The ogres did not care about these scattered poisonous arrows at all. They continued to charge forward as if they were flying. Their strong bodies gave them a strong vitality. These poisonous arrows, which could kill normal forest beasts, could only make the ogres feel a little dizzy. When Wizard Zack waved his bloodlust spell and enveloped their bodies in resistance to dizziness were instantly nullified. All the ogre warriors charged forward and attacked in a frenzy. The Beemen warriors in front of them were smashed into a bloody pulp by the ogre warriors. The only ones who could contend with the ogre warriors were the 2 strange insects. These 2 strange insects looked like locusts and bees. They were more than 2 meters long and had 2 pairs of translucent wings on their backs. The most impressive thing about them was their lightning-fast flying speed, as well as their terrifying jaws at the front of their heads. They flew as fast as lightning, leaving a trail of red in their wake as they arrived before the ogre warriors. Their razor-sharp forelimbs could pierce through the thick arms of the ogres. Once they latched onto the enemy, they would use their large pincers to slice open the ogre warrior's throat. If the other party continued to resist, the alien insects could use their terrifying mouth parts to bite off the other party's neck. Although the ogres had a strong recovery ability, they could not withstand such crazy destruction. Therefore, in the forest, 2 curling red lines flickered everywhere. Wherever the 2 alien insects appeared, there would be an ogre warrior falling to the ground in an earth-shattering roar. The speed at which the ogres slaughtered the Beemen warriors was not slow, but the speed at which the blood locusts slaughtered the ogres was even faster. It was as if both sides were in a killing match, causing a storm of blood in the middle of the forest. The 2 blood locusts each had 11 points of strength, 8 points of vitality, and 13 points of agility. Their strength was not inferior to the ogres, and their terrifying 13 points of agility were enough to crush ordinary ogre warriors. However, they obviously knew how terrifying the twin-headed ogre Wizard Zack was. Therefore, every time they pounced on the ordinary ogres, they would only avoid Zack's position. Although Zack was also called a wizard, he was unfortunately a strength type. Whether it was bloodlust, attack acceleration, or brute strength, they were all buff close-range attack spells. In a situation where it could not catch up with the 2 blood locusts, It could not do anything to them even with its terrifying brute strength. Therefore, from time to time, Zack's loud roars could be heard on the battlefield. While the beemen and ogres were fighting, a wretched black figure was crawling in the shadows of the bushes in the distance, looking at the bloody battlefield with indescribable excitement. After this period of bloody killing, Bliss's strength had also increased crazily. Now, he had reached the peak of a high-level apprentice, and was only one step away from becoming a quasi-wizard. Therefore, even though he knew that there was a certain degree of danger for him to appear here, out of his desire to increase his strength, he still went into the bloody battlefield without a care for his own safety, and took advantage of the fact that the two sides were not paying attention to him. He stared at the battlefield meticulously, and whenever an ogre warrior fell, he would command the thorn scorpions to secretly dig through the ground. Looking for an opportunity, the thorn scorpions suddenly drilled out of the ground while no one was watching, and then dragged the corpse into the underground worm tunnel. Stealing corpses? Only someone like Blitz, who had a completely twisted mind and personality, could do such a tasteless thing. If there were any other apprentice, they would definitely not do such a dangerous thing. But just as Bliss was in high spirits, he suddenly shivered and turned his head to the southwest. Just now, one of the insect spies he had placed in the periphery suddenly caught sight of a strange figure. The bright red armor, the spreading bat wings, the graceful figure, and the insufferably arrogant attitude. For no reason, the moment he saw the red figure, Bliss suddenly felt an indescribable fear and trembling in the depths of his heart. As if he had seen his natural enemy, Bliss's body and soul suddenly trembled uncontrollably. Who is this person? I clearly don't know her, but why is this body so afraid of her? Just as Bliss was shocked to the point of not being able to move, Mary and her 4 subordinates descended from the battlefield. With an ear-piercing whistle and falling leaves, Mary flapped her wide bat wings and descended from the sky like a beautiful goddess of war. Her posture was graceful as she floated 5 meters above the ground. Behind her, there were 3 fully armored knights standing silently. Their blood-red eyes were fiercely scanning every living being in the field. Their black cloaks with red edges were fluttering high in the air. The old fox, Venlier, was still dressed like a middle-aged noble. He perched on a thick branch high up in the tree crown, watching the battlefield excitedly. In his eyes, every living being on the battlefield was a good food. Human sorcerer, you've crossed the line. Facing the few people who had descended with such force, the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack could not help but step out from the crowd and roar at Mary in a low, muffled voice. TSK, since when did you magical creatures learn from the humans and play by the rules? Don't forget, this is the Dark Forest. Whoever has the bigger fist is the truth. Mary's scarlet eyes became brighter and brighter, and a thick, bloody mist emanated from her body. Magical creatures tremble in fear, howl in grief. Mary will be the ruler of this place from now on. With a declaration of war, Mary retracted her bat wings, and her entire body turned into a ray of red light, pouncing towards the twin-headed ogre Zack's side in an instant. Zack, who had never known fear, roared. Red light burst forth from his body, and a thick wooden club in his hand smashed towards the red light with a whistling sound. With the help of his increased attack speed, Zack's movements were almost twice as fast as before. However, against Bloody Mary's high agility, this speed was still not enough. The red light made a turn and passed under the thick wooden club by a hair's breadth, brushing past Zack's right ribs. In an empty space in the forest 30 meters away, the red light flickered and Mary's slender and graceful figure appeared. When she raised her hands and gently licked the bloodstains on her blade-like claws, everyone suddenly realized that Zack had been injured. 10 scratches of varying depths appeared on Zack's right ribs. His originally tough skin that was comparable to cowhide could not withstand the claws imbued with blood energy, and 10 wounds that were neither light nor heavy were left on Zack's body. With the twin-headed ogre's powerful physique, such injuries were nothing. Under normal circumstances, It would only take 3 to 5 seconds for the wound to close and half an hour for the wound to return to its original state. However, what was surprising was that the wounds on Zack's body were vaguely surrounded by traces of blood energy. No matter how Zack tried to activate them, the wounds that had just closed would explode again under the corrosion of the blood energy. Damn it, what's this? Zack roared angrily, and the wooden club in his hand danced vigorously. Streaks of bright red light began to explode on his body. Bloodlust, attack speed, brute strength. With the support of these spells, the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack's strength skyrocketed. Once again, he roared and charged at the enemy that had infuriated him. This time, however, it was not Mary who stood beside him, but a fully armored blood knight, Soros. Although a Tier 2 knight didn't live up to its name, its tough body was the real deal. Thus, in a head-on battle, the twin-headed ogre Zack was defeated by Soros in his area of expertise. The 3 Grade 2 knights from another plane could only display the strength of Grade 1 elites in the Magus world. However, it was enough to deal with these unbearably crude, wild monsters. Bliss hid in the shadows and watched as Mary and the 3 Blood Knights turned the battlefield upside down like a whirlwind, chopping up the tall and mighty ogre warriors like they were vegetables. The fear in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Maybe I should slip away, Bliss thought to himself. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.